All right, let's get started. Let's have a good discussion. So hey everyone, welcome to weekend 2, day 2 of the Hard Tech Fund's Hyperloop Symposium. My name is Samarth, and today we're kind of changing things up. First, we're going to have a 90-minute session on pod scalability, including pod energy scalability and vacuum work, especially around airlocks. Following that, we're going to have a 90-minute session on pod feasibility studies as well as fundraising models. So I'm hoping that today will be a great day to learn about how we can all scale our pod designs together and move into building full-size Hyperloops. So the first 90-minute session is going to be run by Team Strathloop. And then the second 90-minute session is going to be moderated by Kalara Shah, as well as Kirk Mcgregor and the rest of the team at Hard Tech Fund. So hoping that it'll be a great discussion for both of these topics. So Team Strathloop, if you guys want to begin by asking some questions and getting us a bit of a discussion.
Can I share my screen, please, Samarth?
Sure. Go for it.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So let's get things started. Okay, so hi guys, and welcome to Strathloop's panel on pod energy development. So today, sort of moderating the panel, we have myself, Sam, team captain of Strathloop. We have Bradley Craig, who you met yesterday, presenting his airlock systems project. He is our head of body and aerodynamics. We have Alice Beglan Grant, who is our head of scalability and infrastructure. And Kirsty Morrison, who you also met yesterday, chatting about her battery systems concepts research, and she is our head of power systems. So we have little sort of keynote, sort of very brief presentations to sort of take us through the 90 minutes. But at all times, of course, this session follows a very different pattern to the lightning talks. Yesterday, if there's any questions, any discussion, any feedback, don't be shy to interject any of the presenters at any point with whatever it is you guys want to chat about. Of course, 90 minutes is it can be a long old time if no one's talking, so your sort of enthusiasm and questions would be much appreciated. So first of all, I will present a little bit about our team, since we're fairly new to the sort of global Hyperloop community. So I'd first of all like to give a quick shout out to our communications partners, who've really made some of our work over the summer possible. We have Monday.com, which is a team task management platform, which allows you to seamlessly link projects together and task groups together to organize yourself and groups as large as our organization at 90 members. And our second communications partner is Bitslist. This is a software used for CAD/CAM manufacture, and it is a software which is compatible with Industry 4.0, if that is something that you guys have come into contact with before. So smart manufacturing, where you can send CAD files or designs that you have and have them made remotely entirely, which in this post-COVID world could become a very powerful tool. So now that's the shameless plug-in done for sponsors. We'll get on to the presentation about our team, Strathloop, who we are, and what our sort of goals are, and some more context about why we've presented the projects that we've presented to you yesterday. So very briefly, the plugin's not quite done yet, a bit of self-plugging, of course. I am Sam Muirhead from Falkirk, Scotland in the UK, and I'm going into my 4th year of an aeromechanical engineering degree at the University of Strathclyde. I've been part of Strathloop since we started the team in 2018, and then last year I led the structures sub-team, and that really gave me a taste for and confidence in leadership. So from April of this year, I've been Strathloop's team captain. So what are our core values as a team? What are we trying to achieve? Now, the first and probably most important thing for us is that we are student-led and always will be. Our team is entirely students of the University of Strathclyde, all working towards the common goal of developing Hyperloop, of course. We have over 90 members currently, and working on a variety of different projects from a real wide variety of backgrounds all across STEM degrees, as you'll come to see just from our panelists today. One of our main goals as well is to really enhance the university education of our members, so that being a part of Strathloop hopefully makes you a better engineer for the future. We accept that while we are really enthusiastic about Hyperloop and what it can bring for a lot of our members, it is a chance to get experience on big projects and working in big teams. So that really is just as much as developing the Hyperloop tech, also giving people a chance to work on a big project. And even for us, you know, I'm only 20 years old, so it's still very early days in my career. So it really is a sort of learning opportunity for us all. Our main sort of mission, if you like, is the sort of development of the Hyperloop concept within the Glasgow area, and developing that both on the technical side and on the scalability and sort of implementation side, as you'll see in a bit more detail today. And of course, part of that, if Mr. Musk can get back to us, our sort of main technical focus is pod prototyping for the Hyperloop pod competition. This summer, we've been doing a series of group research projects, and they were sort of first of all born out of a problem, if you like, and that problem was COVID-19, of course. And so we have been completely off our campus in Glasgow since March. No one in the team has been on campus since then. But there was also a real desire within the team and from people who weren't in the team who wanted to be part of something while they had a bit more time in the summer, with several opportunities being cancelled in terms of internships. So we started racking our brains what to do, and these summer research projects are really what came out of that. So this is our sort of answer to how we keep moving forward through the COVID crisis. So we have 8 different technical projects that we're working on top of some other non-technical developments within the team. And the real core of those are unfortunately not finished yet, so they weren't presented to this symposium, but they are a series of feasibility projects for the main sort of core Hyperloop systems. So your propulsion, levitation, suspension, and braking concept feasibility studies. And we aim to finish those around the start of October. We also have an interesting study on composite materials for our competition pod, which has been done by a small section of the structures team. And then we have our scalability project, which is what you're going to be hearing about a lot more today from Brad, Alice, and Kirsty. So they are the Hyperloop Station Glasgow project, and within that, the airlock systems analysis project, and also the eco-sustainability of power systems concepts. So that's a bit more about our team and why we've decided to do our summer research projects. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask before I start asking questions of you?
One quick question. In Glasgow, there's a nice subway system. Have you ever taken the dimensions of the subway to simulate a Hyperloop pod? Because it's kind of smaller.
Yeah, I think it's a little tighter than a. It definitely feels tighter. I hope the real Hyperloop is bigger than that. Yeah, but that's quite a good idea. It's not something that we've really done. It's definitely something that we've looked at, the sort of Clockwork Orange, as we call it, in Glasgow, the subway system. Yeah, that's quite an interesting point. I'll let the simulations guys know about that one. That's that, maybe a test track for us. Excellent. Is there any other questions at all? Okay, I'll fire one back at you guys then. So this is for the hard tech fund guys and just anyone here. What has your experience been of working on the Hyperloop concept and more generally through the COVID-19 crisis? What limitations have you found, and has there been any benefits to working the way that we've had to work over the past 6 months? So, Samarth, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I mean, like in terms of like what we are doing and like what we've seen from other Hyperloop teams. So in terms of what we're doing at Hard Tech Fund and like kind of events and stuff that we've run, it's been pretty good for us because we've been able to work with all of you guys all over the world. I don't think we would have necessarily been able to do that before because I think most engineering teams are pretty like are trying to have events in their own towns or like in their nearest area. So we would have only like really talked to Hyperloop at UC Davis or maybe UC Berkeley or Sacramento at most, right? So it's kind of widened our reach a lot for sure. But at the same time, I know for the Hyperloop teams that we've talked to during office hours over the last couple of months, as well as the teams that have attended the symposium, like it's been awful for engineering, like because especially like from March till June when like everything was fully locked, like the university just like basically just up and left, right? And it was really hard to even just get your equipment and do any work. So from that perspective, it seemed very difficult to really like make any progress. However, it was very interesting to hear yesterday from Kristen and Sebastian when they were saying that it was actually a great opportunity for them because more of the governments are thinking about like new types of transportation methodologies in light of COVID-19, and so their companies are getting more interest, and it's been decently okay for their work anyway, since they're doing a lot of more feasibility work, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's been so different for people in different parts of the world as well. Obviously, our sort of proper lockdown in terms of the university kind of is, to my knowledge, only ended a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, it's definitely been really interesting. Is there anyone else want to give any insights into what it's been like for them?
One insight that I have, I watched the Delft Hyperloop team test out their pod on a test track, kind of in a railway yard. And this was like, a month ago. And they had to, practice social distancing and wear masks while doing their test. And it was just kind of really fascinating to see how, while you're in, the Netherlands and they've kind of relaxed the rules, at least they can all come together. They were still practicing like COVID safe practices. And And also, like a couple months ago, I hosted a webinar, which Smarth also joined, on how COVID has affected, Hyperloop, and what will this affect? What will this have as an effect on the Hyperloop industry? And some people in the panel discussion, thought that smaller transportation pods would be kind of the future. So you don't have as many people, like 400 people packed in the airplane.
Yeah.
Whereas you only have like less than 50 or less than 20. And then how do you protect people that are in the pod? And do you use UV lights, or do you sanitize everything differently, or or whatnot? And the research is evolving on best practices for transportation, but I don't think there were any super negative things that came out of that discussion, except just the general effect of the economy in building infrastructure, because the whole economy is not doing so well, perhaps, in a country hard hit by COVID.
Yeah, I think that definitely sounds a lot like sort of the problems that we've kind of had. The biggest thing has been physical testing. I think for us, it's just so difficult to sort of make real technical progress when you can't go and do physical testing to try and validate your research or your simulations or anything. I think it can be quite challenging. But yeah, I think there definitely has been some positives, and I think you have to do your best to try and focus on those positives in such a tough time. So now we're going to dive into the sort of technical part of the panel. So I'll pass over to Brad, who's going to take you through in a bit more detail from yesterday the airlock systems project. So Brad.
Nice one. I so as we were saying, there is quite a lot of negatives to this. Obviously, we can't really do testing and things, but one of the good things that has come to light is it has allowed us to focus on these kind of scalability projects that we wouldn't be doing otherwise. Probably we'd be working on the competition pod. So it's quite nice for people within the team and out with the team as well, just to kind of shine a light on these kind of full scale implementation type things. And the bit that was most interesting for me in that sense was obviously the tube station interface, and that's where this kind of research came from. So yeah, as I said yesterday, we came to the decision that there were 4 kind of main systems that we would use for this. Wait, I didn't even have to ask you to change this slide. Yeah, so they're the ones we had yesterday, and like I said, there's kind of positives and benefits to each one. Mainly the chambers are obviously the best in terms of familiarity with passengers and just kind of making the whole concept seeming familiar and safe to people, and making it more likely to be uptaken perhaps in that sense. And the latter two, the two kind of the indoor and the bridges, a bit more daring technicality wise. And I don't know, at the moment we don't have the data to know if they're better or not, but it's definitely something that's worth investigating into the future, I think. But obviously the big holdback for us is that we're a student team. We maybe don't have the full capabilities to test these big systems or model them in any sense. It's quite difficult to model a docking system without actually building these things. And it'd be good to know that maybe from other teams or people in industry, what kind of systems they're using to try and combat that tube station interface. Don't know if anyone wants to chip in and share what they think, what they know of other teams doing in that sense.
I mean,
do we have any other Smart?
I was just gonna say, are there that many other teams doing that work? I mean, I'm familiar with Delft, right, and Hard Hyperloop, potentially, but in terms of design work, right, I thought most of maybe Hyperloop 1, but like most of the other
Mhm.
Hyperloop teams are focused on feasibility if they're startups or companies, and then like the non-startups and companies are focused on the competition side of things, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the reasoning why I did it, just to try and maybe spur that kind of thinking on, at least within smaller teams, because it helps inform people about the whole concept. I thought maybe you might have heard of other teams doing it, but it's a shame to hear like no one's done much in that
Yeah.
sense. I feel from smaller
Yeah,
teams.
I think on the student team level, I've not really seen very much, but I know that just in doing bits and pieces of research for this, that Hyperloop transportation technologies have a patent filed for sort of a docking system, if you like, that uses the sort of side bridges method, and they use that on like a sort of circular track. So it's basically an end station, and the pod comes in and then goes kind of around the sort of loop, and the station is contained, or the sort of passenger flow, from a passenger flow side, the station is contained within the center of this loop, and basically the pod comes in, bridge sort of comes out to meet the side of the pod, but in terms of the sort of feasibility even of that system, obviously, as Brad kind of touched on yesterday, the sort of complexity of having a bridge move out and then seal, and sort of be rigid and then retract again, and it'll be interesting to see in terms of total stop time whether that is a net time and energy save on whether on sort of just having like a conventional airlock system, because I think like the airlock stuff, and sort of having the pressurization and then the depressurization is a far more known quantity, because it's something that's been used a lot more in sort of other technologies, you know, so in sort of manned spacecraft and stuff. Like you'll have things like that on the ISS, if you like. So they have a fairly good idea of sort of the pump times of sort of volumes of air like that.
One kind of maybe a fifth option, Virgin Hyperloop One at one time for their Dubai proposal had these square metallic vehicles that were like driving around on the highway, and then they would kind of roll onto the pod, and then so you're in this like little box office sitting area the whole time. And I just didn't know if maybe that's what the Endor number 3 is, but I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. There's a few modular type concepts of that, I guess, isn't there? It's like the box office bit, as you call it. Is that like pressurized in itself? Is that kind of?
I don't know. I don't know.
Hope so.
I would think so. Yeah.
I've seen a few concepts of that, and with the relation to those 4 that I've got, that would like implement pretty well in with the Endor concept, I feel.
For sure.
That's definitely true.
I'm aware of because you know like driverless vehicles, it's such a complex task, and probably Tesla's the only one that's doing good enough to make it safe. But I'm aware of other car companies when they're doing this driverless kind of stuff, they're wanting to now build their own roads and, you know, have their own lanes for autonomous vehicles. And I don't know if that, you know, might change how Hyperloop is done in the future, because, you know, if you have your own autonomous vehicle lane, you just kind of roll your vehicle onto the pod and then it takes off. But I don't know, just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff on that, and like sort of in conjunction with smart ticketing as well. So like the idea that you say you live in, I'll try and give an example here, say Amsterdam, and you want to go to somewhere, your hotel is sort of outside of Paris, for example, and you have you know, you can sort of book or you can schedule the whole journey in one. So you would have your autonomous vehicle, which would automatically go to the Hyperloop station. It would recognize that that's the best way to go. And then your autonomous vehicle would sort of be put in one of these sort of modular cargo holds and then into a pod, and would come out the other end at Paris and then automatically go on to your destination, kind of thing. So there's definitely a lot of quite interesting literature on that. In terms of how feasible it is, obviously, I think the problem with like the modular stuff is that, or at least in my opinion, from a passenger flow perspective, it's kind of limited. So I think for cargo and for stuff like that, it is vastly superior. Because you have the freedom of loading and organizing everything in a pressurized environment, and then just sort of putting all the modules in the tube and sending it on its way.
There's even quite a lot of like existing warehouse companies that do like intelligent like machine learning type stuff to track movement of cargo around warehouses and such. And I feel that could lend itself quite nicely to that kind of modular concept. And it would start off from a cargo based thing as opposed to passengers, which is probably a nice stepping stone to that as well. I feel that kind of stuff has quite a lot of potential.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it kind of comes, if you're wanting to have a different concept for, a different type, you could have sort of a cargo pod is sort of built to run in the same tube, but has a sort of different interface for docking to a different area of the station, if you like. That could be one potential way around that, to sort of split it up, to have, you're not going to be unloading your cargo in the middle of the passenger station anyway, but, just having it as a separate airlock system. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. Complexity of adding more tube length to your station and probably more overall space, but it's a potential solution or a way to include that into Hyperloop.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of talk about that by companies anyway, having that kind of multiple types of pods. So you'd have like a passenger pod and a cargo pod, just mainly varying in like the size of it and such. Because obviously with the passenger ones, companies, they have studies to try and get a target number of people to make it economically feasible. And obviously that's prone to change if all of a sudden you're taking cargo instead.
Yeah.
From the past Hyperloop pod competitions, by far the most annoying thing for everybody that was in person testing their pods was the depressurization of the full length of the track. It would take forever, and in the meantime you're in the baking sun, your pod is overheating, systems are failing on the pod because they're overheating, the software is getting all weird, the batteries are running out, and it was always kind of like in the back of my head, I'm like, wow, can we just have one smaller airlock on that tube to make it the whole thing go a little faster? And I wish there was a side challenge of just make it airlock teams. Just please, focus on this, for one Hyperloop pod competition, so we can solve this issue a little bit better. But that's just my side note.
That'd be quite smart, because it's, as we were all saying, there's not really much work being done from smaller teams. So they're not even thinking about that kind of thing. It'd be quite good to encourage that sort of mindset a little bit, I feel.
Yeah.
And
they'll have to include an airlock if they're doing the sort of the 10-kilometer track that has been promised for so long. If they sort of do that, then you think your pump time for, what was it 1.2, 1.3 kilometers, the first track? If that's 10, you're multiplying it by 10, it's linear roughly at that level, and so you could be talking 10 times longer for the 10-kilometer track, which just, God, you'd set it and you'd have to wait overnight for it.
And it's not a wasted concept, because in like huge full-scale implementations, you're going to have some sort of section and type thing in case there's a leak or some sort of emergency procedure. You will need to cut off the section of the pod essentially and maybe pressurize that part to work on it without affecting the whole run.
Yeah, there's a really interesting concept on that as well for like emergency sealing of like a specific area, and it uses like airbags. Well, not like your car airbag, a bit more heavy duty than that. Don't worry, but it's like kind of rubber outer with some kind of like sort of tough inner of the sort of bag, and it just expands in like a car airbag would, but it basically is drawn out by some concepts use magnets, some concepts just use the pressure of the air in the airbag to sort of push out and seal the tube like around the pod, if you like. So it will sort of maintain the pressure just around the pod. So you could put an air bag at the front and at the back, and it sort of, if it detects some emergency, it goes off and it kind of creates this stop. I mean, the practicalities of it are a bit questionable in terms of, the things traveling it. It could be up to 1,000 kilometers an hour, and you're just gonna like put this rubber bag at the side of the track. Obviously, it kind of, but I thought it was quite a novel way to solve the kind of problem of sealing and sort of emergency sealing, which is as big, or from safety standpoint, probably bigger problem than the docking stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm curious, just because like I know that Blake has kind of like looked at their work before and interviewed them. How is Hyperpoland like looking at getting around this problem? Because I know that they were trying to like do kind of a hybrid, like maglev scale up plus vacuum chamber, right? So I'm pretty sure that like this would be an issue for them, right?
Yeah, I unfortunately, I think they're just taking it one step at a time. They're proving like the levitation technologies first, then they're gonna, kind of scale up from there, from open air tracks to fully enclosed tubes. I'm not exactly sure though.
It's definitely a problem that's going to have to be solved by someone at some point. That's for sure. Unless we want all our eyes to pop out. But
I did do an interview back in 2018 with a company that does leak testing, mainly for like scientific equipment. And they are, very precise leak testers, like atoms of leaks. And it was an interesting industry. It's a whole industry on itself, checking for leaks. But I'll put the link of that interview in the description or in the chat here.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Oh yeah, thanks so much. You've found that pattern. It's quite an interesting one. I thought it was, one that I've kind of looked at, because I'm planning on taking the sort of design of a docking system forward to do as a dissertation topic in my 4th year. So hopefully taking some of the research that's been done this summer and trying to actually design a system, if you like, for that sort of interface between pod and station. Speaking of station, nice segue there, Sam. Let's pass over to our next panelist. Alice is going to talk to you guys about the Hyperloop Station Glasgow project that she's been working on. So, Alice, the floor is yours. Oh, apologies, Brad. It's the slide. Okay, Alice.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
Good. Sometimes my speaker doesn't work. So I'm head of the Strathloop scalability and infrastructure team. And our summer project and ongoing after that is to look at designing a Hyperloop station for the city of Glasgow. Next slide, please. And just a wee bit about me first. I've completed my bachelor's degree in civil engineering and architecture, and I'm going to be starting my master's in sustainability and environmental studies just in the next few weeks. And I sort of joined Strathloop in a bit of a strange way over the summer to sort of help with their branding, and then sort of seen that there was a gap that I could look into designing a sort of station with the team that thought would be quite interesting to do. So sort of took that on. But yeah, it's all been very new for me, like coming from a sort of civil engineering background to then working alongside like designing something like Hyperloop. So it's been a lot to learn over the last few months, sort of talking about all the different concepts and stuff. But yeah, the more I do it, the more I'm learning. So that's obviously necessary for then designing a station. The next slide, please. So our sort of project goal will be to design a Hyperloop station for the Strathclyde team. And sort of the end goal of this will to sort of be to create high quality graphics that we can then use to help you to imagine what it will be like to use Hyperloop in the city of Glasgow, which I think is a very sort of fundamental, not that we're selling it, but it's a good selling point, you know, to show these high level graphics to sort of get people interested in what Hyperloop is. The next slide, please. So we will be designing a station for the city of Glasgow, which is sort of the obvious choice as we're based in Glasgow. It'd be a bit crazy to design a station for anywhere else. So that was quite an easy decision to start off with. The link will be between Glasgow and London, which is sort of longest distance that we could do in the UK that would make sense. You know, London's the capital, Glasgow's the largest city in Scotland, so that sort of route does make sense to start off with. The station that we design in Glasgow will need to fit into Glasgow's existing sort of network of transport and sort of complement this. So the station should be near other main like rail stations in Glasgow or near a main airport. So that's the sort of decision that the team's making just now. Are we going to design a station for an inner city location where space is tighter, or an outer city location, maybe near one of the airports in Glasgow? That space will be sort of larger for us to work with. But obviously when we've been looking at that decision, we've got to look at who are we sort of targeting to use the Hyperloop line that we're creating. Is it going to be people travelling for business, leisure? Is it going to be people travelling or cargo? So we're sort of making this sort of decision just now on location, which is also sort of a key factor designing for a location. I've seen other teams designing Hyperloop stations and they sort of design them for no location. You know, it's like, here's a station that could fit anywhere, as opposed to like, here's a station for this exact site in a city. So I thought that was quite important that we go with a station for a defined location within the city. The next slide, please. So the data from RS Components has suggested that the link between Glasgow and London using Hyperloop will take 31 minutes, which saves 238 when you're comparing it to sort of the main rail line between Glasgow and London. Air travel takes an hour between Glasgow and London, but that's flight like time on the plane. But it's kind of important to look at the transit time when you're talking about air travel. Obviously you go to the airport 2 hours before you get on the plane, and afterwards it can be, you know, some time before you sort of actually get off out of the airport. So actually when you look at air travel, it's more approximately 3.5 hours between Glasgow and London. And when we're designing our station, we're wanting to make that journey time from when you enter the station to when you get on the pod as small as possible, with sort of minimal waiting times, if none. Obviously that would be a thing that we'd want. Next slide, please. So our sort of summer research is focused on the components that you can see on the screen, and we sort of thought these were sort of a good baseline to sort of start off our research with. Obviously the design of a station is a massive project. And as we go along and progress with our design, then we'll find other areas that we might need to look into. But this is sort of the topics that I'll cover talking about today that we've looked at over the summer. So the first one is designing a station that has modular potential. And basically the sort of whole ideas behind this is that our station could then act as a template for other Hyperloop stations. And it could either be expanded or retracted in size depending on the location of the site that the station has. So like designing modular architecture is a big thing, but designing any building modular does have a lot of benefits to the people that are designing it. Designing the station in this way will sort of use grids and zones, and these zones and grids will be defined by the function of that area on the station, whether it's sort of an entrance zone, a ticketing zone, a security zone, a zone where there's shops and, you know, a cafe, or a zone where, you know, the airlock is hosted. And it's quite nice because we can then sort of have all these defined zones that are housed in the one station, that if you had a bigger location, maybe you'd have two of one of the zones, and it can kind of fit together quite nicely like that. So that's something we've been looking at over the summer. And another thing is, obviously there's no Hyperloop station that we can sort of look at for inspiration that's currently built. There's just been a few teams that have posted their sort of ideas, but we've been looking into sort of the design of airports and train stations to give us an idea of like what kind of security systems we could use, and things like that. So that's been helpful, drawing inspiration from then. Another key sort of part that we've been looking at is like how many levels our station will have, where these levels will be. Will they be all above ground? Will they be mostly under the ground? Like how many levels will we have, and what function will each level sort of like host? So sort of one of the sort of ideas we've had at the start was that most of the levels will feature under the ground, as we're going to be designing a Hyperloop that runs under the ground as opposed to overground. So it's likely that the top level will be small in footprint, and the sort of footprint will extend as you go down like the levels. And we've been looking at what the sort of priority will be for each level. So we're sort of right now prioritizing arrivals. So we're departures, sorry, not arrivals. We're sort of prioritizing departures when designing the station. So we want the departures to be as close to sort of the entrance as they can be, which would work quite nicely if they were at an upper level as opposed to arrivals that could be at a lower level where space is larger. And maybe on that level as well, we could have something like a cafe, a shop. You've always got more time usually when you arrive in a city as when you're departing. So that will help to sort of minimise the time that's going to take as well, from entering the pod to, or sort of entering the station to the pod. Next slide, please. So another thing, obviously, Hyperloop's a sustainable mode of transport. So the station that we design needs to complement this and be as environmentally friendly and sustainable as possible. There'd be no point in designing a station that wasn't. Obviously, if it's getting used with Hyperloop. So we're going to do this in a few ways, like hopefully by using locally sourced materials, using natural lighting as much as possible, which is going to be quite difficult obviously if we're tunneling under the ground and going down at some like level. How do we then get natural light down to the sort of bottom levels of the station? I've seen some designs that use the airlock system to do this, to bring light down to lower levels. So that's something that we're going to look at as a team. There's a lot of sort of areas that we're going to look into for the sustainable construction of the station. We might even try and use renewable energy if possible. using solar panels or turbines, sort of fit them into the station. Ideally, the station could generate energy to then power the sort of functions of the station. So that's something that we're wanting to achieve when we sort of get started with the design. Obviously, the station that we design, when we're designing it, like, we're always going to go back to the journey that the passenger journey that the passenger takes when they're using the station and going through the station. Sort of fundamental. Like, you can design an amazing station or building, but if you haven't thought about how a passenger is going to use it, how a passenger is going to see a certain area, how they're going to get from one area to another, then it's not going to be functional. So that's sort of a main, going to be a main focus of our design that we're always going to sort of keep going back to. It obviously as well that we want to minimise this sort of time between getting into the station and getting into the pods. So the station, we don't want it to be massive in size for a number of reasons, but we're going to try and, whenever we can, like, minimise the size of our station. We're planning on using as minimal sort of manual security checks and baggage checks as possible. No manual ticketing as well, which sort of would fit quite nicely into sort of the time that we're in just now, with sort of using machine-led, computer-led sort of security and ticketing systems, which sort of takes away that sort of face-to-face contact within the station. So it's something that we'll definitely mention in our design. We currently are sort of looking at a pod capacity of about 28, which is what your sort of Virgin Hyperloop uses for their sort of Edinburgh to London route. And using this sort of pod capacity of 28 and looking at how many journeys we're going to have a day, we can look at the sort of sizing the areas of the station, and sort of look at our capacities of different areas. Next slide, please. That's sort of areas that we focused on so far, but obviously there's going to be many other areas that we might look into when we're designing the station, such as sort of tunnelling options. I know there's a guy in my team just now that is researching sort of different tunnelling options that we could look at mentioning. Obviously the type of airlock is fundamental as well, so sort of Brad's research is fitting in quite nicely with this part of the project. And once we know what kind of airlock our station's going to house, that will make a lot of our sort of design decisions a bit easier. And we're sort of, our idea is to sort of design around the airlock, and get that type of airlock that we're going to use sort of nailed down quite soon in our design. Be harder to sort of fit into a later design like stage. Next slide, please. So yeah, the sort of next stage is that in the next couple of weeks we're going to publish this paper to the team that we've been working on, and then we're just going to get started with designing. We're going to do lots of drawing, lots of sketching for ideas and how the station will look to start off with, and then we're going to go from there. So I don't know if anyone's got anything to ask me about or talk about that I mentioned, or anything that's not clear right now. Happy to answer any questions or have a discussion about some of the things I've talked about. I'm sure it's all a bit new to use. You usually guys focus on the sort of design of the pods, so it's something that's quite different, but I'm sure you can see why it's quite fundamental to look at for the team.
As well as looking at like trains, like train stations and airports and stuff, see, because you were saying the tunnels are going to be underground, would it be worthwhile having a look into what the stations are like at like the Eurostar, for example?
Yeah, we've looked at that, like the Eurostar and also some of the big metro stations, and like some of the big European cities, like such as Budapest, where their metro goes, you know, so many meters under the ground, and it's how they sort of, the structure of that. So definitely the sort of metro underground like rail has been something that we've looked at quite a bit. just the sort of design of the stations. We're definitely going to look at it more. So yeah, it's something that's quite interesting that we have looked at. It's quite hard designing something that there's not really one built and functioning, you know, it's quite different. So
Yeah.
got to sort of draw inspiration from a lot of different fields of transport. Yeah.
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 Makes sense.
Blake, you had a point?
I would like to ask you a question regarding that. What do you say? Have you considered like other modes of transport, like what do you say? We were taking into consideration, like what do you say, the flow of passengers from airports and railway stations?
Have I looked at those and sort of getting an idea of how the flow works? Sorry. Yeah. We haven't. We've looked at that a bit, but sort of as we're designing more, we're going to look into it more. We've only been sort of working on this for a couple of months so far, so we've not looked into a lot of areas in a lot of detail yet, but definitely how sort of passengers flow in an airport. It will be similar in some ways, but different in quite a lot of ways. Like we're planning to have sort of security, you know, right as you come into the station, whereas in an airport that would maybe come slightly later. You know, you check in, you have a waiting area, then you sort of have security further into the station, whereas a sort of Hyperloop station security will be like will happen for the start of your journey. So there's some similarities, but some.
Because but I think like based on previous data, like we can say that what do you say, like traveling from car, then we went to airports, then we went to railways. So that's not. I know that that's not the natural progression. We can use previous data to develop the Hyperloop, right? So that's the we can leverage the previous knowledge on that, and we can develop the Hyperloop. So,
yeah, no, definitely. We're definitely drawn from sort of inspiration from a lot of the different modes of transport to see how this sort of will function. So we definitely will be looking into that.
and
Yeah.
you said about going underground, right? Have you like taken into consideration the tunneling aspect of it?
We have looked at tunneling options, but obviously for me as sort of leading the project, I'm not really wanting to look into tunneling too much. Sort of the station project's going to be, well, big enough in itself, but sort of how the tunneling happens, we've looked into it a bit, but I'm not too sure how far we're going to look into it. But obviously I know there's a lot of sort of environmental considerations to sort of take into account when looking at tunneling. A lot of negative.
Like not only environmental consideration, soil consideration, not only soil consideration, your water level. So,
yeah, obviously, yeah.
soil condition,
You need to look at obviously a lot of your geotechnical engineering, water levels and stuff when you're obviously going underground. So we're sort of looking into that in our sort of structural sides of our research.
You said your background was in civil, right? So that's the reason.
Yeah, my background's in civil engineering. Yeah.
You might have covered all those in,
yeah, no, I have. Yeah, I've done a lot of. Yeah, you'd think that civil engineering we sort of design buildings on top of the ground, but we actually look more into what's happening under the ground. So I have looked into a lot myself, but the team sort of has a mixed background, not mixed background as such, but mixed sort of levels. You know, we're not all graduated, so it's quite hard to sort of design it in that sort of detail. We're sort of going to be focusing more in sort of like a conceptual design, and not focusing and not worrying too much about how it works at this sort of stage. I think the more we worry about how it works, the more it sort of will take away from our creativity of sort of designing the station. I know that from my own experience, when you start to worry about how you know, your station is working, sort of especially under the ground, it can get a
bit messy. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's definitely to sort of come in on the sort of team side of things as well. I think really the plan this year, as Alice touched on, is the station concept itself. I think obviously that project team has been set up for longer than just this year. You know, hopefully it's something that next year we can potentially look more into the technicality of tunneling, or I know there's the SpaceX tunneling competition, which we kind of have half an eye on. And yeah, but I think for now, in terms of the scope of what we're doing this year, as Alice said, the main focus is a sort of conceptual Hyperloop station and fitting that with the sort of airlock design. Blake, you had a question, or you were going to ask.
No, thanks so much, Alice, for giving this overview of the conceptual station. I really do like the module nature and kind of thinking about it modularly and how it could fit the location, depending on the location size, basically.
Yeah.
That's really unique. I don't think I've seen other Hyperloop companies do that. I've interviewed, one architect that made 3D renders of like massive Hyperloop stations,
Yeah.
and I was like, how is that going to fit in the city? Especially in a historic area or a place where you don't want to disturb the landscape or something. But two things. I just want, when I was at the SpaceX Hyperloop pod competition, I would ask the SpaceXers like, hey, what do you want me to be asking these Hyperloop teams? And, because like, I didn't know. And they just wanted for these teams to like reply, with what they learned, whether it's engineering stuff, whether it's team building stuff. So always, just follow your passions when it's coming to these projects and, try to follow things that you actually want to learn about. So that's just one thing. The other thing is I did a lot of polling here in Colorado for Colorado Hyperloop, which is, just a feasibility study, imagining what Hyperloop would look like here. And a lot of that was online. And I was just wondering, have you ever considered like actually polling people or doing a survey of how people would like to have Hyperloop built?
It's definitely something that I think we'll look into. I think a lot of your, when you're designing the building, or the sort of station, it's important to really sort of gauge how a person feels in the station. And a lot of that is based on your sort of design decisions you make. If it's going to be dark, how do you feel in a dark station? You probably don't feel that safe. You probably don't feel that, unsure. I've been in stations myself underground that have been very dark, dingy. How does it smell? How does it, I can see the sort of it obviously like I can see the pods, or if you cannot see the pods, how do you feel using that? So definitely I think that we could do some polls maybe within the team to start off, just to sort of see how it works, and then maybe put polls further to reach further. I'm not sure how Gabby knows more about how that would work. I think it'll be really important in a design to get a feel for what people the sort of psychology of the space. It's a big part of architecture is like how you feel as a person in the building, and definitely something that we'll look into.
Yeah, I mean, at least it'll give you a lot of material to go off of. And yeah, so I just wanted to ask about polling and user surveys and stuff, but also, I know there's a lot of code considerations with building codes for underground spaces, and
many.
I mean, maybe looking into maybe those top health and safety code issues first, and just kind of seeing how that might affect a Hyperloop design. And then finally, my one idea is future like transportation options and connecting with the Hyperloop station, and specifically Boring Company and their use of Teslas, and this loop concept of it's slower than a Hyperloop but faster than your average highway, basically, and how might a loop station with the Boring Company be paired with a Hyperloop station. I just wanted to throw that out there. There are some renders of the Boring Company loop stations, and they're very, very minimal. It's just like white glass steel, and that's it. And like,
I've seen a few.
So
I'll definitely look into that. I've not heard of that before. I've not come across it yet, so I'll definitely look into that.
It might it might trigger Elon's interest at least, because they do want to, eventually have these loop stations become connected to Hyperloop. So I don't see any other Hyperloop company actually directly saying how it will fit into a loop system. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Actually, actually like they they bought out a video like 2-3 years ago, using Tesla's underground, using what do you say? Actually, they themselves bought out the what I think that was the promo video for the boring company. So they used Tesla's only. They bought down the what do you say? This is the ground level, and from the ground level they bought down into a carriage, and they are traveling at 120 kilometers per hour. So
no, it's definitely something to look at.
The rendering was there, but taking into consideration a lot of factors, actually, you can build renders though with the help of computer simulations and all, but taking into actual practicality is like a different concept, actually. Getting to done we are what do you say, he said about taking into consideration the health safety, like the soil conditions, the tunneling, lot of
no, there's no point there's no point of us designing a station that wouldn't be safe to be in. Obviously we go underground, like fire risk is a big thing, so like how do we make it safe from that point of view, like emergency exits and how you evacuate lower levels of a station. I know it's a big thing when working underground. So something that we will obviously need to look into. Yeah, definitely.
For sure, and even how, and it's sort of on the wider scale of what kind of Blake was mentioning with the loop concept, is sort of how Hyperloop fits into smart cities. Obviously something like the sort of the Glasgow is not number one on the boring companies lists for the loop. I can tell you that for a fact. But I think there's still a lot of other interesting options to us. Obviously, I mentioned the autonomous vehicle kind of stuff before, and sort of how we fit Hyperloop into the sort of future world, or the world that it's going to become a part of, I think is a huge part of the considerations for a station specifically.
I think I think that video was brought out because Elon wanted to sell more Teslas.
Yeah, for sure. Alice, sorry.
Especially the use of renewable technologies like powering the station would be really interesting. Glasgow's built on geothermal mines. So the whole of Glasgow, if you look at a geothermal map, it's orange. I know there's quite a lot of research going on just now to use geothermal energy to power stations in Glasgow and sort of stuff like that. So it would be cool if we kind of looked into that a little bit, based energy well, with the sort of underground aspect of it. Even just simple, if you go a few meters underground, you can heat your water in Glasgow. You'd think that we're in Iceland if you looked at it on the map. It's some research that I looked into last year. That'd be quite something that we could look at. But definitely I found it quite interesting yesterday. A big part of my sort of research so far has been oh wow, Hyperloop can run so much faster than air travel or train travel. That's why we should have it. But I sort of realised that yesterday that's not enough to a company. To say it's faster from a passenger point of view isn't enough to get them to give you money. So definitely I think we'll sort of focus on more sort of sustainable aspect and designing a station that is as sustainable as possible. When in use as well, not just the construction phase, but sort of when it's actually in use, as a sort of selling point to the station, not just that it's a station to take you to London in half an hour. So it's something that I thought that was interesting, that Sebastian had mentioned.
For sure. All right. So just so that she gets a chance to speak before we run out of time, I'm going to move on to our next, our sort of final panelist today. So Kirsty, the floor is yours for some more detail about your project or your team's project this summer on the eco-sustainability of batteries, if I can. There we go.
So, yeah, as you know from yesterday, I'm Kirsty and I'm the head of power systems team at Strathloop. And like Sam was saying about us being quite having diverse degrees in the group, I'm not actually an engineer. I'm a physicist. So yeah, I'm going to my 4th year of physics. But yeah, so I've been looking at eco-sustainability of power systems. So yeah, the research we done was all these topics. So I'm just going to go through each one and kind of say what it was we looked at in each of these topics. So the first one being types of battery. So we looked at 3 batteries in particular. We looked at lithium ion, and we looked at the sodium sulfur and hydrogen fuel cells. Sodium sulfur is actually incredibly eco-sustainable because both those elements, sodium and sulfur, are very abundant within nature. So from an eco-sustainable standpoint, that is a very good battery to use. However, obviously when it's like Hyperloop and stuff, that's not the only thing you can look at. You have to look at charging time, the voltage, the energy and stuff like that too. Same goes for hydrogen fuel cells. They are very environmentally friendly in the sense that they don't give off any like emissions or stuff. They use natural gases, which is a reason for that. They're incredibly light as well, which is good. Lithium ion is actually one of the less eco-sustainable batteries. However, for Hyperloop and just for like powering vehicles in general, it's one of the best batteries. Hence why Tesla use lithium ion batteries in their cars. It's just actually a shame that they're not as eco-sustainable, but they definitely are working towards that, as we found from researching. The biggest issue, of course, being battery disposal. When a battery reaches the end of its life, it has 3 paths it can take, and that is you completely just dispose of it, you don't reuse any of it, you don't recycle it, it just gets put in the bin. But this rarely happens now. This usually only happens if the battery's been damaged or like properly there's nothing left in it. Usually they'll try and recycle the parts. So I spoke about the 2 main things, like the 2 main processes for that yesterday. There's pyrometallurgical and hydrometallurgical. So pyrometallurgical is just not good for the environment at all. It's got high energy, high temperature, quite a high metal loss as well. So when it comes to recycling batteries, it's not very good. Hydrometallurgical, not 100% great, but it's better. It slaves 80% of the battery, but it gives off chlorine. So one way that they can look at improving this would be that we look into using more natural organic acids and stuff like that, organic kind of substances to try and stop the give off of this chlorine, and also to put more kind of like labor into actually retrieving all of the like elements and stuff back from the battery, because it is, if you are very thorough with it, possible to get 100% of the battery back, or like the elements from the battery, not the actual battery. But yeah, so something that could really make batteries and just in general Hyperloop better, as was kind of touched on by Alice already, was renewable energies. Different countries are good for different types of renewable energies, which is why this is a very touch and go topic, because it really will depend country to country. I know in Scotland it's definitely quite good to use wind turbines and stuff, because just wind power in general, we have a lot of wind. I'm not saying that solar panels wouldn't work in Scotland. They would, but obviously it's not going to be as beneficial as using solar panels, say, in a country where they've got sun every day. There's also the idea of looking into wave power and stuff as well is really good. But this was something I kind of wanted to get feedback on from you guys as well, was to see what your opinion was on trying to incorporate renewable energies into Hyperloop, if you guys think that would be something that would be beneficial.
I think for sure it's a really interesting idea, and I think for sure, and kind of it becomes part of the sort of smart city architecture that you'd be wanting to build your concept around. I think to sort of fire the question straight back at you, what kinds of ways can you integrate renewable energies into the Hyperloop concept? You know, is that through sort of directly charging, or is that just as a sort of an opportunity to use the space to just contribute to the grid? Like, is it a sort of closed off system, or is it something on just a wider scale, do you think?
Yeah, like, not to be like completely vague, but you could do it with both. Like,
God damn it.
yeah. So, we did look into the whole idea of having like a battery that can store energy, which means that you can charge it from a kind of renewable point of view, or also on the larger scale looking at Hyperloop, just actually integrating renewable energies into like what, like kind of like what Alice was saying, like that kind of idea too.
I think for using renewable energy to charge is good, but especially if you're using sort of wind, your power source isn't constant. And I know that then you have to have a sort of standby source, which is generally carbon based, to then charge the batteries when the sort of wind isn't there, you know. So it's like good to have, but it's not your main source of charging. From a project I did last year, that was for like a station charged by solar and wind combined, for charging electric vehicles. I had to sort of research into that and sort of say, yeah, it could charge it, but you have to have a lot more wind turbines and solar panels to sort of eliminate the use of the carbon source. But yeah.
One
like to ask
interesting. Can I just? It's on the same topic, Reno. So if I go first and then you can ask your question. That's awesome. I think one potential idea is, and one I read on the internet, definitely not mine. I'm not going to claim it, but the potentially using, like, if you use like a power track setup for your electromagnetics, then you could have sort of solar panels along the sort of like an above ground or below ground, to be fair, but track, and have sort of your solar panels as part of like a sort of miniature smart grid along the route of the Hyperloop line, sort of powering the sort of active side of your electromagnetic system, whether for propulsion or levitation or both. It could be quite a neat way of doing it, I think. Obviously, that only works if you're using power track technology, which is a whole other discussion point in itself. Yeah, I just thought I'd throw that idea out into the void.
That definitely is a good idea too. And just kind of go off of what you said there, and also what Alice was saying was, when we looked into it, because of like what Alice was saying, is you can't just like expect it to be there, would really be to be able to have like something that would store the energy and then be able to use it later on, because we know that's possible for cars. So it's kind of like, can we implement it for pods as well? Because I mean, one of my family members has an electric car and he fully powers his off of solar power. He doesn't use anything else, it's just solar power, and he's in Scotland. So I don't know, I suppose anything can be possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Reno, sorry.
You can... what you said about electric cars, right? So lithium, Tesla uses a lithium batteries, right? So how will it be different in Hyperloop? Like, have you thought about improving it upon the existing technology?
Yeah, so one of the topics actually within my report was that we've done a lot of research into what Tesla use their batteries for, and the reason I do bring Tesla up a lot is because it is very similar how they use their batteries for the car as to how we use it for the pod. They use it, if not like almost the same way we will, it will be very similar anyway. So yeah, it is quite good to kind of look at, not even just Tesla, any kind of car company that's using batteries, they are quite good to go and reference, because yeah, it is very similar kind of technology to what we would have to work with.
Yeah.
Have you considered using sodium sulfur cells?
Sorry, what was that? If I looked into
Have
is
you really considered the possibility of using sodium sulfur cells, because there's safety concerns with them due to very high operating temperature? I mean, let's say you're using a sodium sulfur cell and other components around you, they're not rated for that temperature. So have you thought about that, and what did you get?
yeah, well, not even just with sodium sulfur, with all the batteries, there's a big issue with the temperature side of things. Especially with, we were looking at, like, initially when we were designing power systems, it was for the SpaceX competition, and that track can get really hot, as what we've already were saying earlier on. So temperature is a big issue. I think no matter what battery you use, looking into cooling systems is really the way forward for it. It's definitely something that has to be considered, because there's a temperature range for all the batteries, and
Yes, so for lithium-ion batteries, the thing is that you have to maintain your temperature below a certain limit. You can just have a circulating cooling system. You can have PCM pouches. You can do something. Not to mention, the pod is not running for a very long time, so that's also one positive thing over here. Your cooling system does not have to survive for long.
Yeah.
But there's a whole different kind of issue when it comes to sodium sulfur cells, because they have a very high operating temperature. And most of PCBs, etc., they're rated for like 80 degrees Celsius, and the sodium sulfur cell works really well at 90 degrees Celsius. So you're gonna have to worry about your PCBs catching fire in this case. So that is why even the sodium sulfur cells are so good when it comes to electrical characteristics, energy, power, etc. How would you deal with your temperature issue when it comes to sodium sulfur cells? Because lithium ion cells, it's slightly easier to deal with as compared to sodium.
Well, that was one of the reasons why we went with lithium ion for our pod, was because of the issue with temperature. Our power systems did decide to go with lithium ion for the power systems.
Also, have you considered fuel cells and flow batteries? I think there was this prototype which was done very long back, which considered using flow batteries for Hyperloop, and I personally thought it was a really good idea. I mean, you can just change tanks at every stop, and that could actually work very well. It will not have any temperature issues. Flow batteries, they auto-regulate their own temperature. There's no shorting issues. There's no temperature issues. Your BMS is going to be really light. So similar thing for what do you call it, fuel cells. But the problem with fuel cells is that they're more energy dense than they're power dense. So what if, so have you considered using like a hybrid power system using fuel cells and probably a bunch of supercapacitors?
Well, we have looked into supercapacitors for sure. The biggest issue with supercapacitors is how much they cost.
And the voltage ranges.
Yeah, they are quite expensive. Hopefully, the same way as battery prices are starting to become more reasonable, hopefully they will become more reasonable. Definitely, supercapacitors do make things a lot easier, both for just the battery side of things and even the eco-sustainable side of things. They are really, really good, and if money wasn't an issue, definitely I would be going down the route of just using supercapacitors for sure.
I mean, like commercially, if the costing could be managed, I would really love to see a supercapacitor plus a fuel cell system. That would be so good.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to worry about cooling, which is a major issue over here. I mean, we don't have air.
Yeah, definitely. It would definitely be a very impressive system for sure.
I mean, I was actually thinking about that for my pod because I worked on fuel cells for a bit, and actually thought that I could extrapolate that idea very well, but I could not implement it immediately. So even I ended up having to go with pouch cells, lithium-ion pouch cells, which was like, yeah, that's like everybody's going to end up doing that. That's like the best alternative out there.
Yeah, definitely. But
yeah, I think fuel cells definitely has a bit more potential as the vehicles get bigger as well. I know within the sort of car industry, that's kind of what they're finding, is that for larger sort of goods vehicles and stuff, hydrogen has some serious potential. And some quite interesting things have been put in the chat here by Samarth. I don't know if you want to chat.
Hydrogen is a major safety risk. Major safety risk.
Yeah, I think
in vacuum
that is the big issue at the moment. For sure.
Definitely the biggest thing about power systems, I've always said, like, we can build
Mm.
pods as much as we want, but the safety side of it's definitely the biggest issue with power systems, no matter what.
Mhm. For sure, yeah. Smart, do you want to chat about some of the stuff that you've been posting in the chat while this conversation's been going on? I love the Sunset Reservoir stuff, so cool. I had a little flick through
Sure,
it.
sure. Yeah, and I was just gonna say like, yeah, of course, like solar power is definitely possible in places that are not like super sunny, like you said, like even in Scotland, because it's really about the UV, right? It's not about the actual like direct sunlight. So yeah, there's this the greatest example I heard of is like the Sunset Reservoir solar project in SF, which is literally in the foggiest neighborhood of SF, where it's like foggy 260 days of the year or something like that. So, and they've
Yeah.
generated enough power. The problem with solar is actually the space. So I mean, I don't know if you saw the design I had shared of the like cargo loop. I'll show you. I'll share it with my screen. Just real quick so you can see. But can you see the design?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's just like, wow, that looks so cool. And it's like, wait, but there's like nothing else for miles except solar panels.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which,
like, can we have half a city, please? That'd be great.
I mean, this is.
I have looked at this one. But
Yeah.
Look, this
yeah,
isn't
it's great for somewhere, you know, where there's unlimited space.
For sure.
And somewhere that looks it's all
Sure.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what Reno was saying, it kind of looks like Dubai. So
This is the Burj Khalifa is there behind. This isn't
exactly.
Dubai.
So Dubai is fine because they have desert, right? So they can expand that direction. But Glasgow, like,
No.
Yeah.
where are you gonna expand? San Francisco, it's not happening.
Yeah, I think yeah, and to pick up on your other point just about hydrogen generation, yeah, that is definitely something that we are reasonably good at. I think that we're quite fortunate, I suppose, obviously, with sort of wind or any renewable source, it's kind of a variable amount output from those, and I've seen quite a lot of interest in like sort of smart grid stuff about using basically excess renewable energy to basically have a system like a hydrogen production plant using like electrolysis basically to produce your hydrogen, of course, and then it basically just kind of automatically turns on and off based on like when there's excess energy basically. So it will use sort of excess renewable energy to sort of build this bank of hydrogen to use. It doesn't solve the safety problem, but it definitely sort of has potential to solve the sort of hydrogen production problem stuff.
Yeah.
Right. But I think the problem. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kirsty.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say like I think it's great when it comes to like test designs, like the idea of using batteries or hydrogen or wind or solar all sounds like awesome, right? I think the problem that comes when you go beyond 1 kilometer and you try to build like a fuller scale track there, when like I was just doing some like, you know, calculations back in 2015, 2016. Sorry, not back then, 2017. What am I saying? 2017 when I was doing stuff with the Hyperloop team at UC Davis, and the amount of energy you need for those vacuum chambers as they scale is incredible. Like, so that's why I've been kind of thinking like, and discussing when I talk to Kirk and Blake, it's like, all right, it seems it's gotta be ultra capacitors or even nuclear, right? Like you literally would need a nuclear like fusion reactor or something. So I was just wondering what your guys' research has been so far in the vacuum scalability, and how you're thinking of like how are you going to balance that with the amount of batteries or whatnot.
Brad, are you wanting to take that, or am I?
In terms of the scalability of vacuum stuff, my work's mainly focused on kind of the interface between tube and station. So there's not been a lot of work by me in that area. I don't know if maybe you want to input something else, Sam or Kirsty.
Yeah, I can certainly put my worth in if you want. I think, and it kind of to go back to what Brad said at the start of his piece for this panel, was that minimizing the volume of space that you're having to pump out per pod run is so important. And I think obviously we touched on it with Blake's experience of the competition and waiting for ages for the system to depressurize. That really making sure that you have an effectively managed vacuum is going to be a huge part of the sort of energy or feasibility of Hyperloop from an energy standpoint. Because if you have a system that is continually leaking lots of air, or you're having to repressurize and depressurize large volumes of air for every pod coming in, then it just becomes ridiculous the amount of energy you need. So I think instead of necessarily looking at how do we deal with that much energy, I think the focus should be going forward, how do we make that energy less? Have more effective vacuum management and docking interface systems to solve the problem instead of work around it. Like, of course, you're always still going to have something there. You're going to have some energy store to sort of depressurize an area of the tube, or pressurize it if there's maintenance to be done, and I think that's where the sort of segregation of the track could come in. But I would definitely personally rather try and solve the problem than just work around it, if that makes sense, Samar. So that is sort of, is there any other questions on power systems as well? I actually remembered I have a question I'd quite like to ask, and it's, or just more to put to everyone, and it's about sort of modular batteries. So obviously one of the big challenges that Hyperloop faces, or just in general sort of electric systems faces, the sort of fast recharge versus damaging the battery. And obviously Kirsty touched on it a little bit yesterday about how fast recharging can sort of destroy batteries very quickly.
But that depends on your charging system, right? I mean, if you choose to fast recharge, that's literally on you.
Yeah, but for a full-scale Hyperloop system, you can't wait for a long period of time docking to charge your system. You can
divide your entire battery system into different packs. So you can measure how much every pack is being discharged, and you can charge accordingly. So you could just have a couple of backup packs, for example, and just change the ones which you deem you need to change. I mean, to be honest, I don't think fast charging is a good way to go in general, because it damages battery health. Why would you do that? That's increasing your costs right there. You change the cell, you have to check for the cell characteristics, you have to remove your BMS, put back your BMS, etc. It's work. Even though commercially, you might have to look at a system that charges fast, but you would not want to stretch a battery to charge faster than its usual rates.
Yeah, the other thing about charging batteries fast is it totally eliminates being able to use secondhand use batteries, because they, like I said earlier on about batteries, once they reach their end time, they have 3 routes to go by. The last one being reused is that they then get manufactured into this kind of second lifetime of a battery, but they'll only be to 80% capacity, and because of that, it's just not viable to do supercharging. But Tesla even said that, because they do have the supercharging thing for their cars now, and they've said that they only recommend you do it if you're going on a long car journey. Otherwise, just do the at-home charging. So yeah, it's definitely something that I can understand, especially for competition stuff. I understand the need to charge things fast when you've got limited money, limited time, limited everything. However, it then does come into the whole point of you can't really use second-use batteries, but that was something that I was going to actually say. Do people think that second-use batteries would be worthwhile for Hyperloop, or is it something that would just become too difficult?
I think for the Hyperloop, for purely Hyperloop in isolation, I would say no, because of the reasons that you've outlined there. But I think potentially in the wider sort of technology system, I don't see why you couldn't repurpose like Hyperloop cells, or I'm not an expert in these kinds of things, but a sort of downcycled Hyperloop battery could have other uses in society. I don't think they're complete lost hopes, but for Hyperloop, I'm not so sure just because of the performance nature of it. But if someone with more power systems knowledge than me could back that up, that'd be great. Yeah, I think sort of, and what was kind of described there as well, sort of it describes modular battery systems quite well, if you like. We're taking packs in and out, and that was a sort of original point, is that you can sort of, by using a modular system where when the pod docks, part of that docking process is a swap of battery pack, if you like. So if you have a pack that does, I don't know, a number of runs in it, and it gets to the point where it can't complete a further run, or to some safety factor, of course, but that the battery is swapped out. I suppose my question is more just about how feasible do we think that is? What are the sort of problems with that, with a modular battery system, if you like, versus fast charging? Because it can't be foolproof, surely.
Swapping is a good idea.
Yeah, I think the modular battery is definitely a good idea. The one thing is that I would say is I couldn't find too much on the eco-sustainability behind it when I done research on it. However, it was like they are selling it off of this more eco-sustainable battery, so I definitely think it would be a good idea, especially like if it's affordable. It definitely does help with the charge time and trying not to ruin your battery aspect for sure.
Because you could then take a sort of used battery and charge it slower and just have sort of, and that is here comes the downside, I suppose, is more batteries in the sort of circulation of power systems, is that you're probably going to need to have more batteries, and maybe that is the sort of calculation that you need to do, is whether it's better to have only as many batteries as you need and go through them quicker because you're fast charging them, or to have a bigger bank that you've, so you have to make more batteries, but you've more chance of getting sort of second uses and better recycling out of them.
Yeah, it definitely would come down to like what would be more worthwhile, and also it would also come down to what funds you have as well.
No, of course, but just for the sort of full scale Hyperloop system, the cost is obviously a huge part for sure. What's gonna, I think, probably the fast charging at a sort of eyeball glance, because you're having to make less stuff. I don't know what the price difference would be between fast charging and normal charging, but yeah, it's kind of to me anyway, that would be the cheaper option of the two, but obviously far less polar bear friendly.
That's.
I would like to ask you another question. Have you considered hydrogen fuel cells?
Yeah, that's already been asked. We know, we've discussed that in a bit of detail.
I think Kirk had a question just now.
Yeah, sure, Kirk, go for it.
Well, yeah, no, I was just like looking up the NAWA ultracapacitors that Martha pointed out, and I noticed that they make a small scale suite of ultracapacitors for IoT devices. So, like, they advertise that these types of devices can hit half of your sustainability marks. And, trying to figure out the feasibility testing for doing fast charging, especially if you're using an ultracapacitor, it may be possible to just use something like, these IoT grades ultracapacitors if you were to test it out on a really small scale, which is like many batteries, but they were all just small batteries. So, like, if someone were to test out what fast charging were to look like, there are ultracapacitors within an introductory
That
budget.
works at a really small scale very well, but for a larger scale, I'm not sure if that's been tested out that well. And as I said, if you were to split your battery into packs, I think it would work, the capacitor charging thing. If you were to split your entire battery into packs, you cannot do your entire battery at once with that. I
Right.
considered this option.
Well, yeah, but like I was just pointing out that if anyone were to test the feasibility out of this, it's within an introductory budget, perhaps to teams to work with ultracapacitors.
Yeah.
Capacitors are really expensive.
Almost a bit as a sort of like a sort of minimum viable product kind of idea, like getting
I mean, like everyone's doing that, but what I'm trying to point out is that some teams have taken an IoT scalability development approach in order to look at feasibility and what any of the pricing of any of this is supposed to look like when it scales up, in an analog, if not homolog. Then, Samar points out a company where there is like a set of products that are small scale for these smaller IoT budgets, if anyone were to test any of this out. So like, I don't think it's impossible or really infeasible to test out what ultracapacitors could look like for fast charging if someone were to start experimenting. I just wanted to point that out because the actual
no, it's a very good point. It's a very good point, Kirk.
Makes like specific ultracapacitors for testing some of this stuff out.
They're extremely expensive.
What are you specifically? Are you specifically talking about like the Nawa brand IoT ultracapacitors?
No, like for high voltage level, for like any ultracapacitors over, let's say 5 volts or something, they're pretty expensive. The voltages of my packs, they're less than 60 volts. They're like 50 volts or something. And I think ultracapacitors at that range, they're really expensive for our budget at least.
Well, right. I mean, Nawa, some of these Nawa brand like IoT ultracapacitors are recently on the market. So I don't think like they're actually all that infeasible for some of these prices. I'm just saying like this actually is something that could be tested if someone were to go out affordably, like an affordable feasibility test by students. Well, mid-sized student team. Let's put it that way.
With the worry though that the price scaling has not been figured out yet. Is I think what Sri's trying to allude to, right? That like you could do a feasibility study, but how will it like be actually realized in real Hyperloop is the not even real Hyperloop, right? Scale pod designs. Forget about like full scale work. How would you do that is the question. But I think that's I think it's worth trying just because these companies are looking for customers. And their whole thing is, who are our customers? Like, who even wants this tech? Like, we don't. And their idea is like, let's not even like work on it that much because who really even wants it? Like, we need to power a whole grid, right? Whereas if you literally tell them like, hey, we actually would use this like tomorrow, and we pay you for it, because, or maybe even at a discounted rate, for our Hyperloop work. Or through a grant for doing actual Hyperloop development. Like, but please work on this because it's really important because we can't use just batteries, and maybe they'll do something and actually like try to work with you on that. So Nawa, if you're watching, sponsor these teams.
Please give us money, please, anyone. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting avenue for potentially future development into supercapacitors, is looking at these systems, Kirk, to sort of see if we can do some tests on them.
To be honest, supercapacitors coupled with fuel cells would be a great idea as compared to supercapacitors with a battery. I mean, because fuel cells are much more eco-friendly and they're a damn good idea, and they're very well being used already. I mean, there's drones which run on fuel cells. So I'm pretty sure it's not that hard to scale it to Hyperloop. I hope. I haven't.
It's very wishful thinking, but I hope so too. That it sounds like a good idea in tandem as a kind of hybrid system. Sorry, Kirsty, did I cut you off there?
No.
Okay. No, sorry. My mind. That's fine. Okay. I will very briefly chat about, as a sort of team, what we plan to do over the next few months, and then I will do a quick summary of what we've discussed over the past 90 minutes or so. Okay, so we sort of, our technical goals over the next sort of taking us into next summer. We're obviously in October going to aim to get these systems feasibility projects finished and put out there to the world in sort of October time. And that will hopefully lead quite nicely on to sort of design of our 2021 pod prototype. Hopefully a lot of the sort of feasibility stuff that we uncover from the projects will lead directly into conceptual design decisions for the pod. We also, as Alice had mentioned, we're going to plan on continuing to develop the sort of airlock and station concepts, sort of aiming to produce the station design by sort of summer next year. We also have some sort of non-technical goals, I suppose, and really sort of trying to improve the sort of team education platforms to give people within the team, and then potentially going forward, even people out with the team, sort of access to educational pieces on the different systems that we are working on, to sort of start to share this information that we're gathering as a team with the sort of with the Hyperloop community and just sort of interested individuals. Hopefully we get to host or attend events like this, hopefully some in person, if damn COVID would just go away for a second, and also sort of continuing to contribute to the sort of wider community that's sort of represented here today, and hopefully continuing on past this conference to sort of chat with Hard Tech Fund and the other student teams that have been here to sort of further the technology as a whole. Is there any questions on that before I summarize? Oh, real good.
One question.
Yeah?
Have you considered, I mean, maybe it's, Sam, you're maybe doing a good job at this, but some teams like Heart Hyperloop and Edinburgh HyperEd are having like a specific person focused on like STEM outreach or just Hyperloop awareness outreach. Have you thought of having a position like that?
I think it's certainly something that we would love to do. I mean, we've looked into STEM and I've kind of flirted with it on a few occasions throughout the past couple of years. We are trying to build some sort of little demonstration pieces that we could potentially use for STEM and just for sort of using on campus to show people the technology that we're working on. I think definitely as we go forward, when we develop sort of education and development platforms within our own team first, I think that has to be the priority to get the members of the team sort of educated and to get a system put in place for that. Then for sure, yeah, I think STEM is the next step, because you know that is your feeder sort of from going into the team, and also you know to make this technology sort of work. It's going to start with us, with younger people who are sort of going to hopefully make careers out of this, and I think STEM is a really useful way of doing that. Awesome. Okay, right. Well, I will very quickly summarize. So we chatted a bit about Strathloop and what our plans kind of has been over the summer. And we chatted about some of the implications of working over the pandemic and some potential limitations and benefits to that. So obviously you've been limited through physical testing, but sort of having benefits of, or definitely when bigger companies managing to gain more traction for sort of feasibility studies and investment on that as well. We then had a section on sort of airlock design, where we talked about the different concepts a bit further from yesterday, and we had some interesting inputs discussing different systems for sort of different applications. We then chatted about our station project, of which the sort of airlock is part of. Alice gave her fantastic presentation about where that project's headed, and the sort of conceptual station within Glasgow that Strathloop is trying to design, discussing sort of different energy models, which led us very nicely into the eco-sustainability project, which Kirsty chatted about, and looking at different sort of battery systems, the use of renewable energies, and sort of smart cities and grids within the Hyperloop, full-scale Hyperloop technology. And we finished just sort of looking at where Strathloop is going to head over the next months. So thank you very much for coming to our panel. I really appreciate the time to be able to present what this team has been up to. Thank you again to Kirsty, to Alice, and to Brad for presenting their respective projects. I hope I've not bored you too much with the chat. The conversation's been pretty interesting. I think we've discussed a lot of interesting stuff. If you've any further questions at all, or anything that you guys think of, then you can contact sort of info@strathloop.com, and we will do our best to continue this conversation on. So thank you very much, and Samarth, I will give the mic back to you.
Thank you so much, Sam and Team Strathloop, for leading this panel discussion. Before we go to a break, I had one other question for everybody, just because it seemed like we covered a lot of ground, and we didn't really discuss this as much, which is what is the what do you hope is the support for this kind of work in the future? Do you want to are you hoping to do some research work and get research grant funding, or are you hoping to do this with the Hyperloop competition itself has this as a section? Well, how does this scale over time?
I think probably it can be very difficult on the scalability front, because obviously a lot of sort of student teams like ourselves don't have the funding to produce the things that we research and design. I'm doing the sort of docking design from a dissertation, and there's no way I'm going to be able to make that past any sort of small scale. But I think on the research front, and something that the competition does well, I feel, is that competitive aspect that it drives teams to perform and to produce that. You look at how much the pod prototyping has come on over the past 4 or 5 years through having the competition. I feel like potentially some kind of research competition, some kind of centralized judged research competition, and opportunities like this can sort of drive stuff like that forward. I don't know what the other guys within our team, other teams.
Definitely, chances for feedback on research is definitely invaluable. That's when you sort of will progress your designs faster, is when you get feedback from them. If you can't test them, especially for our project, we can't build a station and test it out. You can do that on software, but we're not really going to design it into that sort of level. So definitely, feedback on designs is very helpful from our own team and from sort of wider reach.
I think one of the opportunities that looked really good, obviously we were it was before our team was formed, but seemed to really drive that mini sector of Hyperloop on, was the sort of Virgin Hyperloop 1 route planning competition thing that they ran. I think that kind of thing, competitions like that are research based and on scale, sort of scalability, will do to scalability and feasibility what the SpaceX competition has done to the pod prototyping and systems development, I feel.
I was a participant in that global challenge, and I will try to find my Virgin's massive spreadsheet of all the questions that they wanted to know about the route. And I'll try to get that over to you guys and share this, because it's really fascinating on just what they were considering on route feasibility.
Yeah, that would be quite interesting to see, because obviously the sort of for them, I would imagine a lot of it will be on sort of the implementation as well, rather than just design.
Yeah, and a lot of the data was, I was going up against the Department of Transportation here in Colorado, and of course they have all the data. So I decided to focus my research on more the human aspect, and that's why I did a lot of surveying actually. And the Colorado Department of Transportation did not do any surveys of the actual users, so I was able to have a different perspective upon my research. So,
yeah, it's definitely quite an interesting one, because obviously within, not necessarily within the UK, but within mainland Europe, like the vast majority of transportation networks in Europe are sort of social services. Like they all run on, some of them fairly monumental losses, and they are more a tool for people to use. And apologies, my cat has just spawned. So I think that the human aspect is definitely one that mainland Europe is agreeing with you there, Blake, for sure. Excellent.
All right, so I guess let's take a break for 15 minutes. Thank you so much again to Team Strathloop and for this great panel. And see you guys around 4:20 UTC. All right, it's 4:20, so I guess we'll get started and get back to talking about Hyperloop. So the first thing that we're going to discuss in this session is we're going to talk about the fundraising models that we've seen before, as well as like we are seeing right now, especially with the announcements of these new grants. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation on that, just to talk about the changes that have happened recently, and the history of fundraising in Hyperloop, because it's definitely a big different industry than most. So can you see my screen okay? All right. So yeah, the topic of this discussion is feasibility studies and fundraising models to be able to build a full-scale Hyperloop. So this is the session where I really hope that we can work together on figuring out how we can take some of these ideas forward that we discussed over the last weekend and this weekend, and what are the current models that people have done to scale their Hyperloop concepts. So in the world of Hyperloop, there are traditional fundraising models that have worked, and there are very unconventional and more interesting fundraising models that have taken shape as well. So to start with, on the conventional side, we've had the grant-funded work. So this was like the feasibility studies that we've seen in various parts of the country and around the world. So one really big example of this is the Missouri Coalition study that was completed. And then another example would be the feasibility study that was completed by the government in Maharashtra and Hyperloop One. And there are many different examples of this around the world where governments want to position a city or position a region very well for Hyperloop development, and so they spend the time and money along with private company investment to develop a feasibility study to see if that's possible. So as I mentioned, it's usually a public-private partnership. There's been I definitely want Blake to correct me on this if you've seen this otherwise, but I don't think there's been a study so far for Hyperloop which has been just the government has decided to go ahead and do work. It's always been in part collaboration between a company that's trying to do Hyperloop work and or some sort of engineering firm, as well as that government. So some of these firms include like ACOM and Blacker & Veatch, who've completed some of these studies in the United States, as well as around the world. So that's one model of fundraising. Kind of hard to do. I mean, if you saw from Transpod yesterday, they're not even like they're trying to get to that level still, even though they already have you know, a plethora of work that they finished over the last few years. Their proposal they just submitted was to see if they could get funding and support to do a feasibility study, and hopefully they could do that next year. So that should give you an idea of how intense it is, how much scrutiny there is, because they don't want to invest thousands of dollars in the study and for it to be for no reason whatsoever. There needs to be some tangible reasoning behind why they're even like a pre-feasibility, I guess, really a pre-feasibility as to why there should be even a need for that feasibility study to see if that Hyperloop work should be completed. Then you have private investment. So you have you're all probably somewhat familiar with startups, and you've probably seen the show Silicon Valley, and have seen kind of how that kind of probably that in recent years it's been very idealized. Companies like Google, companies like Facebook, that started out with you know, very few people, little investment, and it became multi-million-dollar companies. Kind of hard to do in Hyperloop because you have to build infrastructure, but there aren't. It's not stopping people from trying, right? Whether it's Hyperloop One or even Transpod or Harivo before they were bought over by Arloop. There are plenty of examples of companies that that have been privately invested in Hyperloop. So these are usually venture capital firms or angel investors who invest a certain amount of money so that they can get back a return over time. That they can, so they take a equity share in that company that they invest in. Again, pretty hard to do when you don't have a proven technology, especially if you, and even harder if you don't have the background yourself, because in a lot of these cases they're investing in the people, they're not really investing as much in the technology. And so if you're not like already a PhD or a master's in the field, or you worked at a company that was really good, it's very, very difficult to get private investment and to convince venture capitalists and angel investors that you will actually get them a return on their money in terms of a profitable business, or will at least help them find that next round of investment to get them off the books. Then you have corporate sponsorships. That's probably how a lot of you guys are funded with the Hyperloop teams. So you're looking to companies to donate equipment or to donate funds to help you work on developing your pod designs. So this is kind of similar to crowdfunded work actually, because it's a partnership between a private entity and maybe a public good, like a public university, but it could also be between two private entities, like a larger company and a startup company, or a larger company and a university that's a private university. This works to a certain degree, right? I mean, especially if you're talking about new technology, like the ultra capacitors we were discussing earlier today. Great sponsorship opportunity there, in that like you have a company that wants to try out something new. They don't know if it's necessarily going to work. They need people who can like do really thorough investigative work to understand it. And then you as a team want that new technology and you don't necessarily want to buy the newest and greatest and best that has been around for a long time because it's too expensive, right? So sponsorships is great from that perspective, and it's only going to increase in the Hyperloop world that there's more development, though due to obviously coronavirus, sponsorships are decreasing on a fiscal amount. I think a lot of the teams we were talking to last weekend kind of reported that being an issue for them, that companies are not as willing to donate money to them. But I think it should still be possible to get at least equipment as well as support from them in terms of what you're doing. That is always very important when you're starting off with the new technology. Where Hyperloop gets really interesting, though, is when you look at the crowd-funded work and you look at these new kind of models of fundraising. So I bring up Hyperloop as being one company that started off as a Reddit-based Hyperloop solution, a Hyperloop team, and kind of brand themselves as this decentralized Hyperloop team. So they started out crowdfunded. That's how they were able to fund their research, as well as continue to do research in other areas. Like they do research now in all sorts of things, like in air travel and stuff as well. So that definitely worked for them, though it was supplemented with sponsorships as well. But really the most interesting example I would say is Hyperloop TT, because this was back in 2013, November, that Hyperloop Transportation Technologies just started out as a crowdfunding project on the Jumpstart Fund website. And the founder of that site was Bebop Cresta, who is the founder of Hyperloop TT and now runs Hyperloop Italia. So there definitely was, he was somebody who wasn't just trying this crowdfunding for the first time, but it was crazy to see how they got enough money to make the first designs, and the team still is decently decentralized today. Has kind of they have a track design in France, but then they have development work being done in the US and in Canada, and they have team members all over the world. So definitely interesting to see those models come up too, where they're trying to pitch to people, the kind of Kickstarter generation, I guess, of the early adopter investors / supporters who just want to like donate to new technology and help see it through. I have not seen yet a Hyperloop company that has used crowd equity And again, Blake, if you have seen this, let me know. But I have not seen a company yet that's tried the crowdfunding approach, wherein so most traditional crowdfunding projects, if you like think about Kickstarter projects, you usually fund a certain project and you get some sort of good or something after funding it, or some sort of perk, but you don't get any sort of growth in the investment, right? It's not an investment vehicle, so to say. So like, for example, if I just literally went to Kickstarter, and so if you look at this project, for example, called Melodicities, and so it's this EP for these musicians who are staying at home. I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I should have just done this for our Hyperloop Symposium, but if you pledge like $1 or more then you get stickers, and then $7 or more, you get a download, $12 or more, you get a CD, then you get a t-shirt. So all these perks that you get for donating, and that's what these teams have done as well. But nobody's yet done a crowdfunding investment model wherein anybody can invest in the teams and then get some sort of return on that investment. Though I think that will be very difficult to do in Hyperloop, just because it's new technology development, and you don't know if you're ever going to really like get a return, because that's dependent on a team actually getting a contract to make that work happen. So these are kind of the different models that we have seen in the past. We're seeing teams do now. And sort of my first question in this is, which models have you all tried to use so far? I think I know this generally what the answer is, but Strathloop, you want to start off like with what kind of fundraising are you doing so far?
Is begging a form of fundraising? Only joking. I think for us it's sort of into two categories, if you like, or we'll kind of three, but we'll call it two to start with. The first one is sort of the grant model. Strathclyde Alumni is a fairly well developed kind of grant system within our university, so that is sort of our most consistent income in terms of grant funding. So that is generally one that we will use on a sort of yearly basis to sort of get some base level. Sponsorships is sort of your extra on top of that, and obviously for developing like sort of pod prototyping systems where you do need much more investment. Then we sort of go down the sponsorship route, probably more in the in-kind donation kind of realm rather than direct funding. I think from our experience, because of a lot of the reasons that Samarth touched on there, it's very difficult for a company to invest directly in a student team like ourselves. I think that's where the competition as well really comes into its own, and I think one of the big challenges that all the teams have had, and all HyperExcite last weekend we're kind of talking about it, is not having the competition. More than COVID, I would say, is not having the competition. I think the competition gives like something tangible for people to invest in. You're investing in this project for this competition, and you're making a physical prototype, and you're going to compete against other people, because that then attracts sort of coverage and sort of notoriety, things that you can actually as a team sell to people. If you look at like Formula One, for example, that's the whole model of funding for them, for teams, is it's ad space. And I think not having the competition or not having any competitions or outlets is what's going to hold student teams back, if the SpaceX competition maybe necessarily isn't a regular occurrence.
Samarth, I have a question for you. Like, how is it, like Sam said, we are in the early stages of our career. So how is it like going to develop our job prospects, like based on Hyperloop, like based on the research that we are doing, how is it going to increase our job prospects in the transportation sector? Like not we are like we are doing the research when on the lines of a transportation research development, right? So how is it going to? I would like to have your thoughts and other people's thoughts on this. How is it going to benefit us from like we are what most of us will be graduating next year, what the 5th years are there in this team, so we'll be interested in knowing how to have a career prospects out of this. So like yeah, I would like to hear your opinion on that, like not only the funding aspect. So
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that that definitely, like, just looking at the One Loop team, because I used to be part of that and seeing the alumni and kind of where they've gone, it definitely helped them get jobs at cool companies that were doing large scale like infrastructural work, especially especially at Davis. Like what happened and why we did cold gas too was because we have a really good aerospace and aeronautical engineering program. So actually, like there's a Professor Robinson, who was an astronaut. So that really helped in terms of the education around aerospace and aeronautical engineering. And because SpaceX was running the Hyperloop competition, so many people at our school were like, "Oh, SpaceX! Like this is awesome. This is how we can like get into the aerospace industry." So I knew a couple of people who ended up working at this company called Spin Launch right after they graduated their bachelor's, and that company was really cool. They were working on like a spin based space launching company where like the rockets like spin in a circle like this, and that's how they take off. So they ended up getting jobs there. As for other alumni, quite a few of them did end up working at the the Musk companies, Boring Company or SpaceX. And then the majority of them though ended up, and I think what you saw from yesterday, in terms of the backgrounds of people who ended up working at Virgin Hyperloop One and at Transport, as well as people who have worked on those Hyperloop teams before, and what they end up doing. There's a lot of people who end up working in engineering firms that work on civil engineering contracts for sure, and it only adds to your experience, especially like I think in civil, and even in like I mean, I'm a material science major myself, so just in my industry, it's very hard to like get good experience when you're an undergrad because people don't really trust you, right? They don't really trust the undergrads around large equipment and stuff because they think you're going to break it since you don't know how to use it. So if you have experience like building something, especially in civil and these like larger engineering fields, then that really like looks really good for you in terms of working at one of these engineering firms, like your ACOM or Blaker & Veatch. And that's where I think a lot of people kind of are not thinking as much in terms of Hyperloop, right? Like I think everyone kind of focuses on, oh, SpaceX competition, like that's the only way we're going to be known, and like that's the opportunity, right? You go present to the SpaceX competition and you try to hopefully, like with the idea that you end up getting a job there or one of the similar companies, or it looks really good for you. But I think if you do good work and you make sure it's like properly like documented, which is why we were very like after you guys for writing good papers and making sure like the citations and all that were really good and the formatting was great, then you should be able to get a pretty strong career in the firm of in engineering in general, especially in transportation, because you all are at the cutting edge of the field, right? So I'm pretty sure a lot of companies especially companies that are looking at maglev and high-speed rail and that kind of stuff, would be very, very, very happy to have a lot of you. And I think a couple of people that I worked with on One Loop did end up working for SkyTrain in Vancouver, which Transpod was talking about yesterday too. And definitely I can see a lot of people going into that industry. Blake, did you want to add anything, since you kind of have talked to more teams and you've seen people kind of go through the process?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day when Hyperloop was doing the SpaceX pod competition, that's how I got into SpaceX. I don't have an engineering degree, so I was just retweeting Hyperloop tweets. But yeah, a lot of them I think got hired by Tesla and Boring Company, I think, later on. But going back to crowdfunding, it has been done through investment strategies like Magway and Hyperpoland. And I added the 2 links in the chat. They were successful and over fundraised and overachieved their goal. But also I want to highlight this AECOM report that focuses on Canada about Hyperloop feasibility. This was just released late July. And they do talk about different companies and how much fundraising and equity they've raised. And then going from that, the whole report and the data that the whole report was based on was combined by Continuum Industries, and that company is based in Edinburgh and is from Hyper Ed university students. So like HyperEd also was one of the original Global Challenge, Virgin Hyperloop 1 Global Challenge teams, looking at the Glasgow to Edinburgh route, or sorry, Edinburgh to London route. And yeah, so I mean, like, they got eventually spun out their own company looking at feasibility of infrastructure like water and electrical and sewer, and modeling that data for new infrastructure projects. And then also we're the main provider of all the data for AECOM's transport study on Hyperloop. So there's that. I don't know if that answers your question, or Samarth, if you have further questions.
Right. No, and thanks for pointing that out, by the way. Yeah, like I totally had not seen that in the study. So yeah, I'll definitely take a look. And yeah, Continuum definitely is a cool company. And again, I think you're also seeing another potential career route here, where like a lot of really talented team members end up spinning out their own companies, and they end up doing pretty well because, like, again, investors, right? They care about you. They get when they're investing at the early stage. And if you can prove that you did this really cool, tough stuff and it worked when you were in college, then they will be a lot easier for you to get funded than, say, somebody else who just has a great idea but has never executed on them before, right? Though it is, a smaller portion. The more people I've seen have ended up just getting pretty good jobs at engineering firms. That's kind of the majority of people I've seen who did Hyperloop work, what they end up doing. So yeah, back to you, Blake, in terms of like, what have you seen people do?
Yeah.
Any other sort of job opportunities in the space?
Yeah, I mean, what you're doing, creating these pods that work in a vacuum, it can be applied to really pretty much any kind of satellite thing. But one other thing I just want to point out, the Hyperloop team, Zeleros from Spain and Valencia, they've done so many startup competitions and they've won, and they just keep on getting funding through startup competitions. It's just crazy. So I would just highlight them as kind of a model. Definitely you are a startup in a sense. So I would highly recommend, I don't know, if you have startup competitions right now and during COVID, but if there are, feel free to apply and pitch and stuff, and it's always just good practice. But that's a major route that they've gotten a ton of funding, is just through startup competitions. Yeah.
That is a fantastic point to bring up, Blake, which I really hope that a lot of you understand through this event and whatnot, is if you guys wanted like a set engineering competition to show how good you are at civil engineering and civil design, this is not the competition for that. Like every team is basically a startup, and that's, I think, what people don't understand. That like it's not that easy. And I think you're getting it now that like, especially when you go and talk to companies and stuff, you're pretty much like, you're raising a fund, you're having to manage a team, you're having to come up with new ideas, and you're having to constantly balance your business and marketing with your like actual development of your pod. That's basically a company right there. Versus other engineering teams where they literally like tell you, or engineering competitions where they tell you exactly what you need to build. And they even sometimes help you with finding that equipment. And really you're just kind of looking to put it together and maybe put it together in a more innovative way, right? And improve your ability to do leadership. So definitely like, that is also another route, is to go like either you start a startup in Hyperloop or even like just pitch your team as a Hyperloop startup, like if you, because that has been successful with people in the past.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, ping your business. I mean, you have business team members, but yeah, see if they can work with the business school to, yeah, host a, you know, get you guys into some of the business competitions as well. Why not?
It sounds like quite a good direction to go. I feel like it's quite a good way of putting it, is the sort of envisaging it as a startup. I quite like that model of working. I think definitely sort of something that Smarth kind of said there sort of resonated with me quite a lot, was the sort of the idea of the competition does kind of bind you to certain development. You know, you develop in a very small area, and I think that's where personally I definitely feel a much greater affinity towards the sort of feasibility stuff and the sort of more human or, you know, economical impact of the technology as a whole. And it would be cool to have chances to develop within that sphere and to obtain some kind of material result from what we do would be great for sure. So I think the sort of business competitions could be quite a good route to go down in that sense. So thank you for that little
Samartha, I like to add to that actually. Like it's not what a pod development is not just what a civil right. It's a multidisciplinary like project, right? So it doesn't depend upon like you can see that from our what a pod design. You can physics is involved, what mechanics is involved, aero is involved, what structural aspects is involved. So it's not about like even team management, like a team. You can learn about how to manage a team within within a Hyperloop team itself, and not only the business aspect. So I was just wondering like what direction normally people coming in a Hyperloop team go to like from a career perspective. So that's the reason I asked.
I think it depends on their starting place, personally. Like obviously, it kind of depends what side of the hype. You know, these. You know, looking at our team, you know, it's 90 people working on all manner of things. You know, it's not no one's doing the same thing, I suppose. And what you develop, what your experiences of the team at university level will sort of inform your choice more. So, like if you're working on sort of infrastructure stuff, then that's probably where you have expertise for, and the kind of companies that will hire you are people who are looking for that. And equally, if you're doing sort of business-based stuff, then you could end up doing things like Continuum, for example. Yeah, so that would be my thought on that. You know, Smart, I don't know if you want to round that point a little more.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I mean, yeah, if you're, sorry, you know, I said civil because it just seemed like Hyperloop is infrastructure, and that would be like the closest major. But yeah, it is definitely a very interdisciplinary project that requires a lot of team members in a lot of different areas. And for that reason, is definitely more of a startup. And yeah, if you're more on the if you're more on the business side of things, then obviously you continue to do you could continue to do business work like that. And I think that's something that also is something I think people don't stress as much. And I've tried to tell people at the Hyperloop team because this is what I did for me. Like for me, like I started out like talking to team, talking to companies, and kind of like growing our brand with OneLoop, and it definitely helped me in startup world. Like it definitely has helped me be better at pitching and kind of improve my skills, but also like now when I come like go and meet people and stuff and they ask about my experience, I don't stay like, oh, I'm just a materials engineering student at UC Davis, I'm third year, like this is what I did. I pretty much start off by saying, oh, like so I worked at OneLoop. We did like I helped lead this effort that raised us like over $50,000 worth of things, and worked with this company, and then it's pretty impressive, like for somebody who's come out of college to have that experience, right?
Yeah,
and
you're pretty much leaving with work experience. Like you're leaving university with work experience.
Yeah, and I know it's at times it feels like, yeah, Samarth, but I can't pay rent with experience, right? I agree with you. So that's why it's so important to discuss the fundraising models and like how your team itself is getting funded. And of course, that puts teams that like Delft to have funding to go full time at an advantage to Strathloop and other people who are undergrads who don't have funding to do that. So that's also part of it, right? So yeah, I guess let's. So I guess that's one question I had for Blake was, do you think that the equity crowdfunding model could work in the future based on the stuff that you saw at Hyperloop and the cohesion that you saw there, or do you think it's still going to kind of be more on the private investment side because it was not super easy for them to continuously scale?
Yeah, I think the scaling part just gets a little bit more complex when you're talking about intellectual property, and when you're working with like a team, is the company taking the intellectual property, or are you taking the intellectual property? And I did do a video YouTube with a former Guadalupe, I believe she was with. She is now working for a legal firm on helping university students do technology transfer for patent stuff. So I would highly recommend you check that out because she has a lot of good advice on what you guys should be doing when you're working on a project, how to document that project, how to go about in making sure that it's just legally sound and nobody gets burnt or anything. So yeah, I'd highly recommend you check that out. Again, large scale, engineering projects that are working as a distributed team like HTT or Hyperloop, it's not easy. They've come really far. I don't know if it's quite there yet. I think in the next couple of years we might see actual products and spun out, but I just don't know. I think it's TBD to be decided. Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to see it work. I want to see groups of engineers all over the world contribute to a product, but Hyperloop is just so massive. It's a big subject.
Yeah, I think it's just like we've been discussing last weekend and this weekend, like what are the technologies that are common goods, right? That I think every team or every Hyperloop should have. And then like what are the technologies that are like new innovations from a team? I think people need to think about that more and see how they can collaborate on those common goods, and so that they can have more time for doing the stuff that they're innovative at, right? Like I just felt that like with the controls, right? And why I wanted to work with you guys on that grant proposal, it just felt like, everyone's kind of just working on the same stuff, and for no reason. Like it's not like one team really was doing anything that much better. Like, everyone was doing pretty much the same thing for controls, maybe slight variations here and there. So why bother? Like, why have everybody spend like 3, 4, 5 months, right, on the development of that when you could be spending that on something more important that nobody has actually like talked about as much yet, like airlocks, right, which is more of an innovation in the field. So I definitely think that can happen. I think when you try to make the whole thing decentralized, it might be a little bit messy, because I haven't. Even Rloop is kind of like one organization, right? They're not necessarily like anymore like just a bunch of random people just deciding to do Hyperloop together, right? So,
I think that model of sort of like standardizing non-developmental parts is something that like motorsport do really well. So having sort of listed components that are not to be developed and are just kind of standardized. Because I do think that it is maybe, you could argue that there is still innovation to be done in every system, but yeah, there are definitely some systems where the sort of elasticity of the sort of development, the hours that you spend versus the gain is just not the same, I think probably control would be one of them. I'm sort of commenting without much knowledge, to be fair, on control systems, but especially at our scale, sort of the control systems that are implemented on the pod side here, I suppose they scale in terms of like pod position and stuff, but in terms of like managing systems, I'm not 100% sure how that would work.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, especially like I think before COVID too, like no one was really used to a decentralized engineering team, right? That was kind of a new thing to begin with, in terms of having teams that decentralized in the format of like, teams of like large companies obviously have decentralized teams that share models with each other and stuff, but they have like siloed pods, right? Like they have, one team in like India does this, one team in like Germany does that specific thing, and then like one team in the Netherlands does that other specific thing, and then USA they have this other design stuff, right? Not like, the same team that's working in India that's doing like controls design is also working in the US, right? And they're doing the same thing together. That was kind of I think not as like much of a thing in the engineering world outside of computer science, right? Because computer science, that's always been a thing since the 90s, or probably even before that, really, but not as much in this field. So that I think that it'll be easier in the future because people are more used to using platforms like GradCAD and Valley Space now. I don't know if you saw their post in the thing. Like they seem like they're a good platform that you could potentially use, or Continuum, right? Like in terms of kind of mapping everything together. But yeah, like just to go back on the Hyperpolen point, Blake was right. They offered 5% equity at a 7 million euro valuation, and they raised almost 400,000 euros. So, which is interesting because like I've always wondered with the equity crowdfunding, that means their valuation is higher, right? Because they came up with this target saying that is 4.46% of 7.2 million euros, right? Then that since they got more investment that for the same portion, then their valuation is probably higher, which means people really believe in Hyperpolen's vision. So that's pretty cool.
And Hyperpolen is like the only Hyperloop group that's saying, hey, let's just upgrade a traditional rail line and make it levitate. And like nobody else is wanting to do that. There is one company that wants to like levitate lorries or semi trucks and then put them on rail. But like Hyperpolen's unique in that regard.
I think it's something that people forget within the Hyperloop concept is it doesn't need to be the full bells and whistles, everything sort of full vacuum kind of setup. And that's something that we'll probably find as feasibility studies kind of are generated of different areas of the world is that different solutions are sort of best fitted for different circumstances, you know. So I think it's pretty neat what Hyperpoland are doing at the moment, for sure. I had a question for Samarth. It was just about the startup stuff. So obviously there's been this sort of a large number of Hyperloop related startups kind of started or sort of came to the fore in the past, 2 or 3 years, say. And do you think we're potentially reaching a saturation point for those startups in terms of there's sort of only being, you can only get so many Hyperloop startups, or there's only so much investment to be put in? Where do you think that point is? Do you think we've reached it? Sort of what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, like, I can't really speak for the investment firms that would want to invest in this, but like looking at the industry, I mean, it seems that there definitely is room in terms of like, if you look at, I guess there's like what typical investment charts look like in terms of what a boom and a bust cycle looks like, and then there's like what actually needs to happen for the creation of the technology, right? So if you look at that boom and bust cycle, the Hyperloop definitely has some space because of the fact that like there's been an initial popularity and there's been an initial surge, but there hasn't been nearly enough investment because I think a lot of companies still felt that it was too early. And I think that now that you have government grant opportunities and you have standardizations such as the TUV standardization and other specifications coming out for Hyperloop, that more investment firms will take it more seriously. So I think you're going to see a lot of Hyperloop technologies companies coming out, I think, within the next year or two. I think particularly at the end of this year into next year, probably going to see a lot of people kind of come out of lockdown and start developing stuff. And they're like, oh, hey, for the last like 8 months, we were just working on a Hyperloop startup for fun. I think there are definitely going to be a lot of those examples coming out because people have nothing better to do. Right. So then, but from a technology like development perspective, right? Like what is necessary to develop the technology and how that'll go. My hope was with Hyperloop, especially like and that's why I really appreciated your presentation on the sustainability aspect of it. That we're creating a whole new industry here, right? Like we're creating a new form of transportation, and since we're creating a new form of transportation, we can do new things, right? We don't necessarily have to do the same things that we did for train travel and the same things that we did with automotive development, right? And create new supply chains that really like ensure sustainability and ensure fair labor practices, and really make sure that when it scales up, it's done properly. And I think a lot of people view that as like very conservative, as in like oh, but if you do that, it's going to take forever, right? But not really. Like there's like if you plan it out correctly, it could be done properly, and it has. There are certain teams and organizations that are trying to do that and doing a good job at that, and others that are not really trying to do that as much because they're trying to just like get a contract and get moving. So yeah, I think there's going to be a glut, but I think the bigger problem now is you're going to see a bunch of companies that are trying to do just like in all the other technical industries now. And you've seen them now too. It's like they're all trying to do everything, right? Like, and you're just like, how can you do everything? Yeah, like whether it's Hyperloop, Hyperpoland, or Celeros, or Transport, or Hyperloop One, or any of these companies, right? They're trying to do all of it. They're trying to do the whole like pod development, track development, like everything you can do for infrastructure, which is great, but like it's just gonna not like it's. And yeah, I guess they want to do that because they'll get the most investment, right? They'll get, they'll become a multi-billion-dollar company in terms of instead of a multi-million-dollar company. But then being a multi-billion-dollar company, you need to have a ton of employees that you pay with the billions of dollars you make, right? So it's kind of it's not exactly like you're necessarily winning. Whereas
Yeah.
a better approach could be a lot of smaller startups that are solving each of the individual problems and helping each other along the way, adding new value. Especially considering that nobody really knows if Hyperloop is going to work at scale because nobody has done that work yet. So
for sure.
that is something that I think is, not being that could be looked into a bit more.
Yeah, I like the idea of sort of having startups like specialize in certain areas. Like I think it's certainly for the sort of ecosystem, I suppose, of the Hyperloop world. Like I think it would probably mean that we grow faster, at least in my opinion. I think like you're definitely right, Smurth. All the companies are trying to eat the elephant, so to speak, by doing the whole thing in one go. I think it also the way that it's kind of set up right now, at least from what I see, is it's like there's only going to be a small number of companies benefit out of that, if that makes sense. Like there's just going to be one or two companies that kind of get it nailed or they get it all right, and kind of there are maybe only a number that survive to implementation stages. Whereas if you focus on, say one system or one supply chain of that, then I think you've potentially got a bit more viability for a sort of larger number of companies.
Yeah, and speaking of companies that are looking to do Hyperloop work, we have with us on the call Vivek Tiwari from DGW Hyperloop. And DGW is a cloud computing company, and they are looking to do Hyperloop work. So Vivek, did you want to tell us a bit about what your company is doing in terms of Hyperloop and how they're approaching this problem?
Yeah, hi Samarth and everyone here. I really enjoyed watching you all. Your sessions, they've been really informative. And I joined yesterday as well. And these are really great sessions. And kudos, Samarth. You should do these more because it's important for all of us to get together. Because at the end of the day, our goal is the same, right? To build a Hyperloop system to spread more awareness right now. And so speaking of specialization, we are more on the compliance and government side of things. We are trying to still figure out which ministry is going to deal with this. Convincing the government that a Hyperloop should be built. India does need a Hyperloop system, and we're focusing on the cargo only side. That's our approach right now, not passengers. So yeah, that's where DGW stands right now. One of the routes that we've pitched is the Delhi Mumbai route. And it was also one of the routes that were selected in the Hyperloop One Global Challenge that you and Blake were talking about earlier. So that's the route that we've pitched, and we're working on it. We're working with the state governments. We've sealed multiple partnerships with the state governments, with the central government, with the Ministry of Transport. And so that's about us.
Sounds good. So you're moving forward. Would you say you're going to still be focused on compliance related work, or are you thinking of also expanding to doing this other kind of development work that you're seeing from these other Hyperloop companies?
Yeah, I mean, we have partnered when it comes to tech side. We were recently in talk with the IIT Madras team, Avishkar Hyperloop for an acquisition. We've also partnership with IIT Indore and RRCAT. They make the components for rockets and all for ISRO. So we are also working on the tech side, but our focus right now is first to get the legality sorted out, because there's a lot that's happening in this field, especially in India. It can be pretty challenging since the government, it depends a lot on the mood of the public and the government. The Virgin project in Maharashtra, there were reports that it recently got scrapped because the government changed there. So we're still focusing more on the government side to first have
That
the
project was scrapped because of safety issues as well. Sorry to interrupt, but that was one of the major issues.
Definitely. There were safety issues, but it's still very volatile to pitch everything that you have and start first focusing on tech rather than the legalities and working with the governments on this.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So then, in terms of the compliance differences, are you seeing kind of sort of similar compliance specifications from each of these states, or is it different per state? How has it been so far?
Some states have shown very positive response. Our home state, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, even Maharashtra. Three of these states have been very positive towards Hyperloop. When we went up north, we had some difficulties convincing them. It's more dependent on which party is currently in which state, and at the end of the day, it all boils down to that when it comes to that.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And then, like, yeah, what if their position is to help infrastructure or not, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's so definitely glad to hear that, like, that's going pretty well in terms of trying to seal those partnerships and getting that information. So in terms of freight, have you considered like what those freight types would be yet, or are you still thinking about like what exactly that rate would be?
Yeah, so what we are focusing on is mainly the cargo that goes by plane right now, which is mostly e-commerce and such kind of cargo that requires that prioritizes time over their need. Right, there's a lot of cargo and freight that it can take 3 to 7 days to reach one place to another, and it won't really affect. But when it comes to e-commerce, like my Amazon package, it needs to be delivered within a couple of days. So that's what we are covering. And our route also, it covers major warehouses and fulfillment centers of Amazon and Flipkart and the major e-commerce brands that is covered in this route as well.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And yeah, definitely. Like, I think there's a lot of literature to support that, right? That like that's the most optimal use of Hyperloop. And obviously, I think the Hyperloop one realized that when they picked your route, right? That it's good type of freight, and then also the distance, right? It being that it's a distance that is beneficial for Hyperloop and not too short that it could be a train ride, or too long that it could be a that needs to be a flight. So that's definitely good to see. A question I have for you, and also back to Strathloop, because I wanted to ask them this earlier, is are you guys focused on above ground or below ground Hyperloop, and why?
Well, for us, we are more on the above ground side, because on this route, you don't the Plateau, the Malwa Plateau, and then there's Rajasthan. There's not really much of a difference in the elevation levels, and it's not going over any major water bodies. So we're more on the overground side when it comes to this specific route.
Alice, do you want to chat about this for us? Yeah.
I know that I think that we're going to be looking mostly underground, just sort of due to what the UK is like as a country. It's very, very built on, and there's not much unbuilt on land. I've seen some like propositions for Hyperloop to work and have the overground, like have the lines like running on top of train lines. But from like any kind of high-speed rail network project that's going on in the UK just now, there's a lot of problems with it, like environmental problems. It's sort of slowing sort of the introduction of it. So I think we sort of focus on underground, but not really looked too much into it yet. But that's sort of my initial thought would be it's easier to go underground than overground. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I'd also add that it doesn't necessarily need to be above or below ground for the entire line. You know, there can be sections where it's more beneficial to be under, sections where it's more beneficial to be over. Obviously, you don't want to be changing your elevation all that often or all that suddenly. But I think, you know, there can be some sort of scope for having sections that are above ground, sections that are over ground, as long as we can manage the sort of transition between the two, or even if you're going into sort of more mountainous terrain, you know, sort of digging through mountains, as you do with sort of conventional high-speed rail lines in sort of mainland Europe.
Especially like in Norway, they like tunnel the whole way through, like guns and everything are tunneled right through the sort of mountains. So Norway would be a good example to look at for that.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
in the Alps
like,
as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's really amazing how they do that. So
for sure.
So I would like to add to that. When Dubai Metro was built, they had considered they had taken into consideration the underground aspect. Like when Dubai, like they have this railways metro system in Dubai, they had to take into consideration the foundation of the buildings, like the existing buildings and existing environment. So I think that can be applied for Hyperloop as well. Like how will you traverse a project through a existing foundation? Like that can be applied over here as well. Like for example, like if you have traveled in Dubai Metro, part of the metro goes underground in areas that have tall buildings. So it was an engineering challenge to go to connect both points. So I think that can be applied over here for Hyperloop for taking into consideration the soil aspects and all.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other thing to keep in mind here, though, and Vivek, this is the next question I had for you is, so obviously the another reason why you wouldn't be able to do below ground is because in India, a lot of the water comes from board mills, right? So if you were to dig underground and to put a Hyperloop track there, then you would affect the drinking water supply, and you would affect the water tables, which would make it very hard to build.
You'll be pumping water out of the tunnels from time to time. That's about it.
Sorry, you say that again?
You would be pumping water out of the tunnels from time to time, and you'll be having water leakage issues. That's about it. That's like a major engineering problem that a lot of tunnels already face.
Right. What I was saying more was like that is an issue. Of course, in all places that you would be doing that kind of engineering work, but it's more so in India where you're dependent on that water source, and you don't want to necessarily affect that, right? So the question I had for Vivek was like, how are you in terms of above ground? Have you like talked to governments about right of way, and or local businesses about right of way, or how have you kind of broached that topic of how using their land in any way?
Yeah, that is an issue. And again, there are multiple bodies that deal with when you go underground, especially in India. So, in urban centers, that is again a major issue. So, so far, our feasibility studies and everything we've done has been based on the above ground solution, right? So yeah, we haven't considered. We have obviously considered the below ground, but we prefer above ground when it comes to our route, and deal with that.
And the preference comes from cost, I'm guessing, or what exactly?
Yeah, cost is one factor. Then there's another factor that once you go underground, as you switch states and cities and even districts, there'll be different authorities that you'll have to deal with. These Some of these authorities could be under state governments, under central governments, and yeah, there are water bodies, there are water pipelines that go through that, especially in urban areas. So that is an issue. Above ground has been our proposal that the government has also supported us with.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I can see why now, like, you could potentially a place that has a more homogenous government can support a below ground, like a place like Norway. For example, I think might if they want if that was such a proposal could work out versus like in yours where you're doing across multiple states in India and there's much more jurisdiction differences that exist where the governance makes it hard to do that work as well. Another question I had about your team was, are you looking to long term supplement your? I mean, if you feel uncomfortable answering this, that's fine. Let me know. But are you long term looking to supplement your Hyperloop work from your cloud computing work that you do, or how are you hoping that like the Hyperloop work will develop, and will it like to eventually generate its own revenue or something like that?
So the model that we are focusing on is PPP model, but the parent company of DGW Hyperloop, which is DGW, we do deal in different in a horizon of industries. But in cloud computing, we have a consultancy business. There's an AI company that we launched last year. So there are a lot of business. But when it comes to Hyperloop, we do have our vision that we want to build Hyperloop. It's definitely long term. Uh, and we are building partnerships with public and private uh, authorities on this. It's definitely a long-term vision, and we are looking forward to actually building the system, or at least be a part of the legal lobby that comes to Hyperloop when you say Hyperloop India. So yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And to kind of build on that topic of the public-private partnership, Kirk, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the Net Council and what kind of grant opportunities that exist now in the United States that didn't exist before, and whether you feel that is a fair model for it or not really.
Oh, if I think Chow's actual push is good. I won't comment on that latter part, but the Net Council is really in a position at this point, if not for a specific formulation, to investigate what types of interactions the Department of Transportation really should have for, allegedly new technology. Like there are different stakeholder members of the Net Council, which is really just like some of the administrations of the Department of Transportation. So the current idea, according to their recent report, is that Hyperloop perhaps should be under the rail administration because the rail administration already has, some experience and jurisdiction with maglevs. Like this is a weak argument, but it's one of the few that's being pushed so far. In terms of policies and lobbying, that's sort of what the office of the secretary does at Chow's office. But they also run international agreements, not necessarily with
I think we lost Kirk.
Oh man, I guess he got disconnected.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I was just sort of itemizing that the Office of the Secretary does organize international agreements, and they don't necessarily need to be, contiguous geographies, because the Department of Transportation also covers maritime administration, dealing anything with ports, and DP World, as a large port operator, is already partnered with Virgin Hyperloop. So there already is some consideration at the Department of Transportation for what new angles would be on new technologies, including Hyperloop. And Hyperloop may not be, under the prerogative of rail, which sort of anticipates who would be funding what type of scoping or feasibility or prototyping or larger investments would look like in terms of grants and other types of financial arrangements. So in terms of grants, they're still scoping. There are current open grant opportunities generally under the Department of Transportation for what large lines might look like if they run through some rural area. If these are large capital investments, then there are grant programs for these large capital investments. If there's air quality mitigation aspects that people want to explore, the Department of Transportation has grants open for them. The larger programs for pilots for transportation development really are mostly under the Federal Transit Administration, which is all public. So the U.S. Department of Transportation currently is oriented in its grant structure for funding pilots for transportation if they have some public benefit. Now, this is not necessarily something where you need to read between the lines, but you can, in that if you don't want to go down that particular public transit admin route, one is kind of dealing with other large line operators. And that may in itself be an issue. Now, if somebody wants to convince, Department of Transportation via the Net Council to think about this otherwise, that's what the Net Council is meant to entertain, is that type of, current dialogue for who would like to manage what. And if any one of those administrations wants to start increasing its grant funding for scoping and feasibility, prototyping, and other types of investments, the Net Council is supposed to be taking that type of information and figuring that out. So grants are really about what you want to ask for at this point. And they are listening. How well they'll listen to you, I guess, is another lobbying matter. But, like, if people want to explore specific aspects of Hyperloop, like, there are open grants for being able to pursue that. It's just not like Hyperloop specific under Department of Transportation. Someone who are doing like zero emissions, they have grant funding open for that. If you're doing urbanized area evaluations, they have grants open for that. So it's really just like,
Oh man, you lose him again? Okay, he's back.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, it's really about, a targeted approach with the Department of Transportation. They don't have a unified approach for something like Hyperloop. But that's what the Net Council is supposed to do, is figure out how that unified approach could go down if it were to go down. Is it going to be under multiple administrations, or is it just going to be under like rail? At which point, if someone were pursuing freight and rail under Department of Transportation, the majority of the commercial revenue model for rail freight is fossil fuel. Like, that's most of it. That's what's dominated not just the lobbying of rail in the United States. It's like at times 40% under some regions of the commercial revenue is in coal, and depending on your year, liquefied petroleum, because maybe the pipeline doesn't work out. But Department of Transportation also covers pipelines, so it's not like Department of Transportation couldn't cover Hyperloop under non-rail. It could cover it under like, pipeline investigations, under which it already has broad discretionary investigatory powers of funding, really, to look at what safety and the engineering of that safety criteria would go into something that basically resembles a pipeline. And especially if you're carrying hazmat, which would, is fossil fuel. That also is something that doesn't necessarily need to be rail. So there are multiple approaches to this, and there are open grants for this in the United States. It's just more like right now the open grants are for targeted approaches. If anyone were to pursue, like an integrated Hyperloop, set of grants, it's time to ask the Net Council for something along those lines. Like they have actively solicited for conversations and stakeholder input, which means, ask now or, bite your tongue for a couple of years.
I find this really funny that we're having this discussion with 0 American teams on the call today. It's all people outside of the US.
Well, that's the thing. Like, Department of Transportation does have the discretionary authority to consider what international agreements are like. I mean, that's the whole aspect of like, mass transit for pipelines or for rail. I mean, like for contiguous geography, it's the United States and Canada. But with port implications, they actually have greater discretionary oversight over, a wider range of transport international, like for FAA, for maritime, and for pipes. Like they actually have very broad discretionary power to look at something, as long as it's like well justified, and you're really pulling in the safety aspect.
Okay, well, it really just sounds like we gotta just put in applications for things, because especially as I'm reading down, there are small business and research grants from the U.S. Department of Transportation that they said could be used for Hyperloop, and yeah, like I think this was the point that every news source was getting at here, where it says Hyperloop, for example, may be eligible for federal and financial assistance under certain departmental programs in the same way that other maglev projects may be available, and basically going on to say like we will consider this as other railroad, as sort of other railroad development. Sorry, you made a face. What were you going to say?
Oh, sorry. I was looking at an invasive species outside my window procreate. Like, there's just going to be more of them now. It's the dumbest.
But so seeing this model develop in the U.S. And then on the flip side, you're seeing in Europe the European Hyperloop standards, and then them also saying we're wanting to spend more of our budget post-coronavirus on Hyperloop development. And it will be in this kind of grant-like format for new startups and for new research partnerships. For you, Vivek, and for you, Shrestri, being from India, do you think this kind of model would be effective in India if the government were to work with you on something like this? Or do you think it would have to be something different in India?
To be honest, governments in India, they don't seem to be very stable in general when it comes to ideas like these. So I would really like the private sector to work along with the government. I don't want it to be a completely government entity. I don't want to be a completely private entity. It should be like a partnership of some sorts. And we can have universities for the R&D section. For example, we're doing it, IT Madras is doing it. And we can have like companies for sponsoring us and for like overall and for the final manufacturing end of things. So I think it can convert into a huge project which can really help people, open so many windows for R&D, etc. Overall, a really positive thing. But oh well, it's
Yeah,
really far-fetched as of now.
I mean, I agree with Shreya and what she just told. We as a company, we've partnered with the with multiple institutions, with R&D, and many IITs. In fact, a couple of IITs that are working with us. We also have private players on board. We have one of India's largest companies in transport sectors that have joined us. We'll be announcing our partnerships very soon. We had actually an event planned that got postponed due to COVID, where we were going to announce our progress and new partnerships that we've made regarding this project. And we also had the problem that Kirk recently mentioned about which ministry was going to handle the project. We reached out to Railway Ministry. They said yes, but then it got handed over to Ministry of Road and Transport. Even Virgin had the same problem when they initially came to India. They pitched the project to the Railway Minister and the Ministry of Railways, but the project was actually picked up by the Ministry of Road and Transportation. And this is, we still don't know who's going to actually handle the product and move along with it. So we are working with both the ministries right now, but we definitely need some sort of a different approach than traditional transportation projects when it comes to Hyperloop.
Makes sense. And thanks for highlighting that issue. That is a hard one to decide. Like, yeah, does this go more into this sector or that? And I think that's also going to be a tough issue in the US too, in terms of when we apply for like say we set up a partnership between UC Davis Hyperloop and Hyperloop One, right? And we want to get grant funding from that. Is that going to be under National Science Foundation and be considered like a new kind of scientific approach to transportation, or will that be more under Department of Transportation? And will that be at the US like country level? Will that be the US Department of Transportation you're going to ask, or California? Definitely seems more like US, just because our Department of Transportation in California is still trying to work on high-speed rail, but somewhat successfully. I mean, could honestly, like, the Hyperloop could make use of their infrastructure as well, and they could allow for better development in those side of things too, since they're not really making a ton of progress on that end anyways. But yeah, this is definitely an interesting question I have now for Strathloop, being that you're in Glasgow, which is in Scotland, and Scotland is part of the UK, but Scotland was also more voting towards staying in the EU and doing work with the EU. I know that a lot of the EU partnerships with UK are not going to change that much because of Brexit, but who are you looking? Are you considering yourself an organization that can apply to EU funding and maybe EU grants, or do you think that you would really just be looking for support from the UK government?
Oh God, what a political minefield you have just opened there. God. Okay, right. I'll try and leave my own personal politics out of this. But yeah, I think the way that it's probably going to work, obviously, while we're still part of the UK, is obviously kind of the same as the rest of the UK for that part. I can't see us getting any special permission. If that situation does change, then obviously we will be able to become a part of that sort of regulatory framework within the EU. Like, I know it's something that they are probably further ahead within the sort of mainland Europe than we are in the UK. With the technology, I know Virgin Hyperloop One have been doing a lot of work on the Edinburgh-London line, and Hyped have sort of been driving that forward as well. But for us, in terms of applying for grants, I suppose we will sort of have to do what the sort of constitutional decisions or the politics within our own sort of area end up playing out like. Yeah, but it's definitely on you go, Alice. On you go.
I think Scotland does have good relations with the EU. So I think they want to maintain that. I've seen from like a lot of companies who want to sort of maintain that out with Brexit. So even like kind of things will be set up to allow Scotland to maintain these sort of relationships that we've established within the EU, even though we won't be part of the EU, if that makes sense. I know work's been done on that, so I think we still might be eligible in some ways for these kind of European grants, even though we're technically not a European country. I think Scotland wishes to maintain the sort of relationship that we've developed with the EU. So.
Yeah, like if you look at the polling figures, that is a general consensus of that sort of Scotland as a region within the UK.
But then it's just like legally, are we allowed to do that? You know, are we allowed to benefit from
that's the
EU funding? Yeah, when we're not
Exactly.
part of the EU.
Yeah.
But it's just if the EU wants to let us benefit from it, so.
Like I think there's a lot of geopolitics involved in that, kind of on the wider level, not just even within a Hyperloop, of course. Things that we have no more control than our ballot on, you know. Yeah, I think from a Strathloop perspective, we can only, of course, really do what the regulators say. I mean, I hope that we still have access to EU funding, because that for us is still more funding at the end of the day. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the sort of coming years.
Makes sense. And yeah, sorry to throw you all like very political questions, because I know that this is more of a research thing, but I know it's definitely important because you know, we're all looking for funding and all looking to build the stuff, and you know, infrastructure project is it can be a very patriotic thing, right? I know in the US they definitely make a big deal about saying how we made the highway system and it was like we were one of the first, and I know that definitely like people care a lot.
I think because it's so intrinsically linked to sort of social aspects of a country as well, like transportation and mobility of people, like it's
and environmental aspects, like
of course
Scotland as a country like really are pushing sort of leading in the EU sort of environmentally, so it's something that we're quite well placed for that. So yeah, definitely in that sort of aspect, I think that it could be pushed forward.
For sure.
So speaking about collaboration, I think that's another reason why to think about your team more as a startup in certain circumstances, rather than just a you know, a club at a university or a research institution. Especially since some of the work that you are doing you could argue is very similar to what DGW Hyperloop or other teams are also that are from companies are also trying to do, because you know, you all are looking at how to build Hyperloops. So one question I had was this is for Kirk actually. So can you tell us a little bit more about on small business grants and grants like that? What is the how much can you subcontract, and what does subcontracting mean? And a little bit more of that information.
Oh, you mean specifically the SBIR program? Oh, yeah. That's a U.S. program, so for U.S. by U.S. They really have to be like a U.S. company. Most of the work and really the employees have to be U.S. based work and U.S. Civilized employees. But you know, to answer your question about subcontracting, that could include any like international work, up to 1/3 of maximum subcontractable work that can be done internationally. If there's good justification because the technology just doesn't exist elsewhere. And for Hyperloop, I mean, if that sort of happens, does the Department of Transportation have SBIRs for doing this sort of thing? It can. I mean, usually it doesn't orient specifically towards it. I mean, it's not currently oriented specifically towards it, but you know, communication with program managers within various administration branches of the Department of Transportation may be lucrative in that aspect for opening up, you know, successive grant funding rounds of 150,000 to 200,000 on average for feasibility testing, phase 1 feasibility testing, or phase 2 prototyping of some particular novel, innovative, for-profit business activity to be concerned. You know, so like, if the U.S. teams are really listening to this, yes, there are SBIRs open for this. No, they don't have to be NSF because the technology doesn't have to be that novel. You need Department of Transportation; those are smaller and far fewer between, but they exist. And it's not like it's the only administrative agency department that will look at this type of technology too. I mean, if it's energy related, the Department of Energy will look at that sort of. I mean, if it is technologically related and it's really cutting edge, then maybe the National Science Foundation will look at it too. I mean, they do consider that under their current SBIRs if people actually want to do that sort of thing. It's more like, I guess, nobody really knows exactly which administration is going to pick it all up, so no one's really identified a specific steady stream of SBIRs for it. But you know, like the SBIR program is open for U.S. entities to apply for testing their phase 1 feasibility and phase 2 prototyping now. Phase 2s are typically like $1 million for prototyping of some, you know, minimum viable product that your company will develop, or a service, or some type of platform if it were software or firmware or otherwise oriented. As far as international relationships go, like, yeah, SBIRs can do that, you know, if somebody wanted to do that. And the AECOM report really does underline that the companies that they interviewed, which seem to have been thorough, no one really wanted to do like their own development. They really just wanted the license. So they kind of just outlined like, hey, all of these teams, they could be subcontracted to just do like piecework on a lot of this anyway. Does the company actually have to, you know, be one of these startups, Hyperloop startups, to actually develop a line? Well, no. So like the startup team doesn't actually have to necessarily be the applicant for any of these like Department of Transportation or other SBIR grants. They could be a subcontractor or other type of consultant. You know, so if teams really want to specialize in something and then later advertise that, you know, they can do international collaborations on national level grant funding mechanisms. The United States is currently set up to do that sort of thing. Technically, you know, are people really pursuing it? No, so it's like a waste of money. And it's not like the Department of Transportation here isn't blowing money because money's already disappeared from DOT under job. So it's not like, you know, you shouldn't try. Like, please have the conversation with NET. Please do it. Talk to them, even if it's international. They're taking international inputs as far as, you know, what stakeholder organizations may look like and how they might swing deals for, you know, what would lead to, you know, a larger regulatory framework and or set of investments, even if that were preluded by initial grant funding at a national. So an international scoping grant. Could there be an international scoping grant? Yeah, because Department of Transportation's already done that for pipelines. So it's like, they could do that as long as they see like some industry partner actually want to do it. Do it. Get a letter of support from an industry partner on, you know, a pipe or, you know, some port. Talk to U.S. Department of Transportation. They were listening. They want to know, like, if you want to set up regulatory frameworks with them, how much of the work are you going to do so they can do as little of it as possible and they'll pay you for it. That's the gist of it.
Yeah, I hope you're all listening, and I hope everyone watching on Facebook is seeing too that yes, please put in proposals or message us, and we'll be happy to help you write up those proposals and you know, apply, because yeah, like Kirk mentioned, like they're looking for funding. And also just wanted to mention that like in Europe they also have a version of the SBIR It's called the Fast Track to Innovation grants from the European Union. And I think I just read it. I was just reading an article just now because I don't really know much about Scotland, to be quite honest. Like many hundreds of millions of euros of funding was given by the EU for infrastructure development in Scotland, and continues to be into even past 2020, especially with regards to hydrogen energy. So I'm pretty sure if you were to get in contact with those groups, at a minimum, you'll get some really good like feedback and at least have like a much better network of advisors. At a maximum, you could probably just be added on the grant. They could just be like, hey, we want Team Strathloop to be our interns basically, or to be our developers to help with this project. Since you're already doing that work, right? I mean, you're pretty much doing that feasibility work. So I would get in touch with them. Does that make sense? Sorry, we're kind of just going through a lot of very big topics.
Yeah, no, of course. It's I think, yeah, it's another route for grant sort of stuff for us. So yeah, I don't see why we couldn't.
Yeah, if you pitch like a lot of the infrastructure investment and developments just now in Scotland are focused on renewable energies, and it's like a big focus in Scotland. So if you sort of put forward that Hyperloop's a sustainable mode of transport that would fit into that agenda, then I think they're more inclined to, you know, be involved.
For sure.
Definitely the sort of main sort of selling point to sort of develop that technology in Scotland.
Yeah, and that's something that we try and play on with our values as well, sort of with the sustainable transport aspect, being real front and centre for what we do.
Yeah, because there's not really so much of that in Scotland just now. You know, we're great at producing renewable energies and, you know, powering the country via renewables, but definitely good to sort of power the transport by that as well.
Yeah, on the renewable energy front, obviously there's sort of Catapult, which is like a funding type thing that they use for renewable energies across the whole of the UK. I don't know if it does exist, Alice, maybe you can help me out, but I think it would be quite good to have a similar kind of system for sort of transportation.
Yeah.
On a UK, Scottish level, or obviously there is the EU stuff that Smarth had mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're definitely lucky to be in Scotland. Like the amount of renewable energy we generate blows England's amount out the water. So we're sort of we're lucky. So we actually sell England, like, you know, we sell them our energy. So we're definitely like at an advantage at that point. So just how we sort of like play to that advantage of where we are, and what sort of connections we can make through that, to sort of help our team. But definitely we're in a good place.
Right?
Absolutely.
Sounds great. The only question, like, so it seems okay. I think it's very like you can see now that there's kind of a government move towards Hyperloop and new transport in the US. It's there in Europe, and you know, as long as companies and teams work together and like aggressively go after these grants, right? I think it should work out. Right. I think the only problem will come about if like you just have a bunch of companies applying on their own to try to do like all the stuff, just because it'll be hard to make that sell. But I don't think companies are doing that anyways. If you look at like what Kirk was mentioning with ACOM and even with Virgin Hyperloop and the Net Council, right? It's not just one company; it's multiple companies. But the next thing that the thing that is still unclear to me is for India. Like, I mean, it seems like we could easily just like, you know, do grant applications in Europe and in the US and add you guys on that, like, and as contractors working with us on this development. But at the same time, obviously it will take a lot of like government outreach and work, and there is a kind of feeling that like, you know, it's not like there's only a certain level of research and development you can do before it's like actual infrastructural work, and that needs to be funded by the government there. So kind of my last question for the session and for Shreyashree and for Vivek is, what do you hope the next or what are you looking towards for like fundraising for these kind of things? Are you hoping that like companies, like larger companies in India, like you had mentioned the rail company, and potentially larger conglomerates in India, like maybe even Reliance or somebody, like if they could, put in money into this infrastructural work like they did with the internet, or are you hoping that you can try something completely new?
I'm hoping for universities and larger companies and the government to work together. It will be like a three-way system. That's what I'm looking at for now.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. The three of them are going to have to work together in order to have this. We can't just build a new model for that. There's going to be public equity, government subsidies. Then there are going to be institutions that are going to work on the R&D side of things. So it's going to be an effort by all these parties, whether it's the government, private institutions, government institutions, and private companies. So it's going to be a joint effort.
Okay, so you're thinking that it'll be companies, so starting to begin with is going to be companies that are going to sponsor some of this research, as well as like invest in the first feasibility studies, and then hopefully the government gets on board, and then they'll also kind of subsidize some of this work through some similar grant system or other forms of funding like we're seeing in the US and Europe. Is that kind of what I'm hearing as a kind of like how you see that?
Yeah, exactly. You summed it up well. That is the way that we have been moving so far, and it seems to be the way that's right for us.
Okay. Yeah, I mean it seems like that's what everyone in the world is doing. So I guess we need to just start getting into those collaborations then, and seeing how we can pitch, and just continually working at those to see kind of get the reactions from different governments and larger companies who can maybe have a little bit more capital to put into this kind of thing, and see it grow from there. I think it seems like the best next steps in terms of where this is all going to head and how we're going to get to that infrastructural development. And the model definitely looks like the kind of common goods are going to be done by a lot more groups together, either in a competition-like setting or something similar. And then you'll have a lot of these like very novel ideas probably done by one company or another company, or specific station designs, right? Like, for example, I'm not going to look at a station design in Glasgow. I'm not in Glasgow, right? Whereas you guys at Strathloop will, because you're there and you care about it, right? Same with like DGW will look more specifically at indoor and places in their region than they would in ours. Those differences and those design differences are definitely going to come up, and that'll be a lot more of where the innovation seems to lie in terms of development. Before I end up closing this up, like, anyone have any other questions for anybody here right now?
I think we're all good. It's been a really enjoyable couple of weekends for us. Thank you for having us, Hard Techland.
Yeah, well, okay, then I guess we'll end it off there. Thank you everybody so much for coming to last weekend's event and this weekend's event. It's, I think, been a phenomenal event that we did not, even expect to go as well. We had, you know, an awesome set of pod-specific presentations last weekend from, you know, the team UC Irvine's Hyperloop site, from Cooper Union, from Hellman Hyperloop, from UC Davis. You know, this weekend we had the presentation from Strathloop and from Kalrav Shah, who was talking about his research. We were able to hear from Virgin Hyperloop One and from Transpod and from DGW Hyperloop. Yeah, it's you know, it's been what I thought it would be and more. I'm definitely very excited for this work. Like I've already said, I don't know if you guys had seen the email I had sent out earlier, but you know, I'm definitely trying to see what the next steps could be. And the first thing that we're trying out is we're trying to see if we can try a grant on Gitcoin together. So Gitcoin is this platform for donations that's kind of similar to your Kickstarter or whatnot, but specific for open source software. And it's a little bit more orderly in that, like, you can't just sign up whenever you want and get funding. You have to submit a grant application by one of their rounds, and then for the next 14 days, they have like a set of their own screen donors that then can go and fundraise and add money to these grants. So being that it's open source software and it's kind of, the name alludes to cryptocurrency, a lot of their projects are very crypto focused, but you see other ones like Black Girls Code that are like a little bit more, you know, a little bit more focused on other forms of open source software. So I was just thinking of doing like a very small grant application for controls, because it seemed like we're all working on controls, doing the same stuff and spending a lot of time on the same design. And I wanted to see if we could do like get around $1,000 per team for teams that have submitted papers to the symposium and have, you know, made sure that they're formatted properly and are interested in doing controls work together with other teams. So if you're interested in that, like, you know, definitely get in touch with me. Even for anybody else who's watching, even if you didn't attend the symposium, let me know. It would be something that I would definitely like want to at least discuss with people and see if it works out as a way to look into crowdfunding as a model for this. If it works out, great, right? Like if it doesn't work out, then at least we'll have seen that it doesn't work out. We'll have some good data points, and at least we would have discussed the controls problem together a bit more extensively, and know what kind of partners we want to get sponsorships from and how we would do the development work together. So yeah, like I said, I hope this is the beginning of many partnerships to come. I hope the SpaceX competition comes back next year and we all see each other at Hawthorne and have a nice bunch of drag races between our pods. But yeah, it was a phenomenal weekend. Same thing with last weekend. Thank you so much to Team Strathloop for your panel before. And thank you so much to Vivek for basically helping us run a feasibility study panel without even really knowing it. So good job. Hope you all have a great rest of your weekend. Take care.
Thank you, Smart.
Very much.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See ya.